Welcome everyone to Paranormal M. Thank you for coming back for another video. Before we start, don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss future uploads. And if you like the stories in this video, please give it a like. We're starting tonight with a story from someone who grew up in a house that had a strange history, though they didn't know it at the time. At first, everything seemed normal, but after a relative stayed with them, the house became harder to ignore. Let's get into the first story, and I hope you all sleep well tonight. I grew up in a house that always felt normal, at least at first. My parents and I moved there when I was around 9 years old. It was an older place, built not long after World War II. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a living room, dining room, pool, garage, and this extra little room behind the garage. Nothing strange happened for the first couple of years, so none of us had any reason to think the house was anything but ordinary. Then my cousin Mira came to stay with us from Europe. She was supposed to be there for a few months, and about a week after she arrived, she brought something up at breakfast. She looked at me and said, "Can you please stop knocking on my door at night? And stop trying to open it?" I remember staring at her, completely confused, because I had no idea what she was talking about. I told her it wasn't me. A few weeks later, she said it had started again. The knocking, the doorknob turning, someone trying to get in. Then after a while, she stopped mentioning it. Eventually, she went back to Europe, and life went quiet again. At least for a little while. About 2 months after she left, when I was 12, I had one of those nights where I just could not fall asleep. I tossed and turned for hours. I turned on the radio, I tried reading, nothing worked. It was close to 3 in the morning, and the wind outside was really strong. From my bedroom, I saw what I thought was my mother coming out of my parents' room. She was wearing a pale pink robe and a little pink bonnet. That immediately felt strange to me, because my mom never wore a bonnet to sleep. I didn't even think she owned one. And I knew her robe at the time was blue, not pink. Still, I thought maybe she was going to the kitchen. She would sometimes check the stove at night to make sure the burners were off. So I got up and followed her. I went down one hallway, then another. I checked the bathroom. Nothing. The family room. Nothing. The dining area. Nothing. The kitchen. Nothing. I kept thinking, okay, she has to be in the living room, or maybe the second dining area. But there was nobody there. That was when the chills hit me. Not just a little shiver either. It was that deep, cold feeling where your whole body knows something is wrong before your mind catches up. I went back to my parents' bedroom and woke my mom up. I asked her how she had gotten back to bed so fast. She looked half asleep and told me she had never gotten up. I told her, "No, I saw you. You were wearing a pink bonnet and a pink robe." She said, "I don't own a bonnet, and my robe is blue." Then she told me to go back to sleep. But I couldn't. I knew what I had seen, and I knew it had not been my mother. I went and turned on the hallway light, then closed my bedroom door. My dad woke up, came out, and turned the light off. So I got up and turned it right back on. The next morning, when everyone was awake and actually listening, I told them everything. My mom said I must have imagined it, which made me really upset because I knew I hadn't. I described exactly what I saw. My dad believed me. Later, he told our next-door neighbor, Mr. Harris, what had happened. And that was when we learned the story. According to him, back in the early 1950s, a single man who had been a soldier lived in our house. A married couple lived nearby. While the husband was away on business trips, the wife and the soldier started having an affair. One day, the husband came home early to surprise his wife, but she wasn't there. A neighbor across the street told him what had been going on, and said he had seen it happening for months. The husband went home, got a gun, and came to the house we lived in. He found his wife there with the soldier. She ran, and he chased her outside, all the way toward the driveway beside my parents' bedroom. That was where he shot her. After hearing that, I couldn't stop thinking about the woman I saw in the pink robe. I wondered if maybe she was still there. Maybe she didn't even know she was dead. We stayed in that house until I was in my early 20s, and I was honestly relieved when my parents finally sold it. I never saw the woman again, but later I moved into the room where my cousin had stayed. That was when the knocking started for me. Something would bang on the door and try to turn the handle. Glasses would shatter for no reason. Some nights, I would feel something shove me off the bed. Years later, I looked the house up online. After my parents sold it, it had been sold 17 different times. And when I saw that, all I could think was, maybe every family after us eventually felt what we felt. Maybe that house never let anyone stay for long. I only ever captured one ghost photo that truly felt real to me. It was on an old iPad years ago, and the strange part is, I don't have it anymore. It was deleted completely by accident when my little boy, who was only a toddler at the time, entered the wrong passcode too many times. Back then, the security settings were brutal. These days, you usually have to turn that kind of data wiping feature on yourself, but at the time, it was just built in. 6 wrong attempts, and the whole thing basically self-destructed. 2 years of photos and memories vanished. No backup, no iCloud. And tucked in there with everything else was the one image I still think about. The ghost photo. I remember thinking, of course, the strangest, most impossible thing I've ever captured, and now there's no proof of it. It felt almost ridiculous, like the universe had handed me something extraordinary, then quietly taken it back before anyone could properly see it. This happened about 9 years ago at Barry Pomeroy Castle in southwest England. I'm Australian, so it's not exactly somewhere I can casually revisit on a weekend and try again. It was the middle of the afternoon, in summer, with clear skies. Honestly, the most unbelievable part of the story might be that it was actually sunny in England. I had taken the photo because of a wall. Not a dramatic doorway, not a tower, not some gloomy underground passage. Just an old wall inside the grounds. The light was falling beautifully across the handmade bricks, and I thought it would make a good reference for a watercolor painting later. But there was also this feeling about it. Nothing obvious, nothing theatrical. Just a quiet pull, like some small, invisible hand had tugged at my attention and said, "Here, look here." So I took the picture. That night, when I was looking through the photos, I saw her. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. You know how the mind can make shapes out of shadows and stone? But the longer I looked, the clearer she became. A woman. She seemed to be sitting with her arms out beside her. She was terribly thin, with sharp collarbones, long dark hair, and pale skin. Her face looked hollow, with dark shadows around her eyes, and her mouth was open in this silent, awful expression. She blended into the stones almost perfectly, but once I saw her, I couldn't unsee her. It was like one of those magic eye pictures from childhood. One moment there's nothing there, and then, suddenly the image rises out of the pattern, and your brain can never go back to not knowing. She looked anguished. That was the part that stayed with me. Not just the shape of her, but the feeling that came through it. Deep sadness. Real suffering. I sat there staring at the image, and it genuinely shook me. I handed the iPad to my partner and only said, "Do you see her?" They looked for a moment, then went very still and said, Yes, I do. And that was enough. I hadn't explained what I thought I was seeing. I hadn't pointed anything out. They saw her too. Now, Barry Pomeroy has its own ghost stories, of course. One of the best known is about the Green Lady's Tower. The story goes that a woman was imprisoned there by her jealous sister and left to starve to death hundreds of years ago. Whether you call that history, legend, or something in between, it's one of the hauntings people often talk about when they mention the place. When I visited the tower, it was covered in ivy, with green light filtering through the leaves. It was easy to understand the name. It had that soft, mossy, storybook kind of atmosphere. But the strange thing is, I didn't feel afraid there. I'd expected to. I went in half prepared to be spooked, but the tower felt peaceful to me. Beautiful, even. I remember wondering whether all the ghost stories had just been exaggerated over time for tourists. Then I tried to go down into the dungeon. There were 2 entrances, one on either side. I started with the left one. The stairs were well lit, the walls were plain, and there was nothing visually frightening about it. But halfway down, I was hit with this sudden, overwhelming terror. It wasn't a thought. It wasn't imagination. It felt physical, almost animal. A hard, primal fear that grabbed me in the chest and told me, very clearly, not to keep going. I tried to push through it, because I'm stubborn and I really did want to see everything. But I couldn't. The feeling was too strong. The place felt claustrophobic, hostile, and terribly wrong. So I turned back. A little while later, I tried the other dungeon entrance, thinking maybe I'd just startled myself the first time. The same thing happened. Halfway down, that heavy dread came over me again. Not exactly fear this time, but despair. A thick, sinking feeling that made it impossible to continue. So I gave up. I remember thinking it was strange that everyone made such a fuss about the tower when the dungeon was the place that felt truly awful to me. Maybe the old story had shifted over time. Maybe the wrong place had inherited the legend. Or maybe places hold more than one sorrow. After that, I went back up into the sunlight and walked around the grounds, trying to shake off the feeling. I started photographing the stones and walls again, just to settle myself. That was when I took the picture. Not in the tower, not in the dungeon, just near an ordinary wall, maybe 20 feet or so from the tower. And somehow, that was where she appeared. I wish I could show it to you. I really do. But another part of me has always wondered whether it was never meant to be kept. When I still had the photo, I remember feeling uneasy about sharing it publicly. Not because I was afraid people would mock it, though I'm sure some would have. It was more that the image felt private somehow. There was such pain in her face. It didn't feel like a trophy. It didn't feel like something to wave around online and invite strangers to pick apart for entertainment. It felt like I had witnessed something terribly sad, something that deserved respect. I know that may sound strange, but if you've ever felt something like that, you'll understand. Some hauntings, if that's what they are, don't feel like performances. They feel like wounds. And wounds shouldn't be paraded. Still, I wish I had it. I wish I could show it to the right people, quietly, respectfully, and say, "Here, this is what I saw. This is what I felt." But I can't. The photo is gone. And maybe that's part of the story too. Maybe she allowed herself to be seen once, just briefly, and then the image was taken back. Maybe it was never mine to keep. I know people say trust your gut all the time, and it can start to sound like one of those internet phrases that gets passed around until it loses meaning. But a few months ago, at Reagan National Airport, my body reacted to a stranger so strongly that I still think about it. My husband and I had just gotten off an overnight flight from Seattle. We were exhausted, in that weird, foggy way you only get after sleeping badly on a plane. Everything felt too bright, too loud, and slightly unreal. The pickup area downstairs was packed, so we took our bags up to departures instead. It was early, still cold outside, but the air felt good after being trapped in airports all night. We stood near one of the concrete barriers while my husband called his aunt, who was coming to get us. Traffic was crawling, so we knew we'd be waiting a while. That's when this man walked over. At first, nothing about him seemed strange. He looked completely ordinary. Late 20s, maybe early 30s. Clean jacket, earbuds in, groomed. The kind of person you'd assume worked in tech or finance or something like that. He complimented my husband's coat. My husband said thanks. Then he complimented mine too, and I kind of laughed and said, "Thanks, man, appreciate it." He smiled, but it didn't quite land right. He said, "Yeah, I'm sure you do." It was such a small thing, not enough to be rude exactly, just a little off. Still, we kept talking. He asked where we were headed, and we said family was picking us up. Then he started talking about family too, but every sentence had this sourness underneath it. Like he was joking, but not really. At one point, he said something about family and friends only pretending to matter. We tried to be kind. Just polite stranger conversation while waiting for a ride. And then, suddenly, everything changed. I don't know how else to explain it except that the air around us felt different. My whole body went cold. Not regular nervousness, not social discomfort. It was fear. Deep, physical fear. The kind your body seems to understand before your brain catches up. His face had changed. He was still speaking in a normal voice, but his eyes were different. There was this anger in them that hadn't been there before. He was looking at us in a way that felt almost hateful, like he was imagining something terrible and we were part of it. That was when I noticed he didn't have a suitcase, just a backpack, which stuck out to me because he had been talking like he'd just come off a long trip. Then, very casually, he said, "I don't really have anywhere to go." Written out, I know that doesn't sound terrifying, but standing there with him, every instinct in me was screaming that something was wrong. My husband is usually the kind of person who gets drawn into conversation and tries to be friendly even when things get awkward. So I knew I had to get us away without making it obvious. I said I needed to use the bathroom and started walking back inside. The man looked at me and said, "Bathroom, huh?" That made my skin crawl, but I kept moving. Once I got inside and down toward arrivals, I called my husband. I tried to keep my voice calm, but I said, "You need to come inside right now. Something is seriously wrong with that guy." While I was on the phone, I heard the man in the background say, "Is that him? Tell him to come back out." My husband ended the conversation politely, something like, "Good talking to you, man." And the stranger said, in this cold, mocking voice, "Yeah, I'm sure it was." A minute later, my husband came inside. The second I saw him, I felt this huge wave of relief. Before I could even explain, he looked at me and said, "No, I know. That was really scary." That was when I realized I hadn't imagined it. We waited inside until his aunt pulled up. When we got into the car, she was happy to see us and asking about the flight, and I remember feeling so grateful she was there. Not just because we were tired and wanted to go home, but because it felt like she had unknowingly pulled us out of something we didn't understand. As we drove away from the airport, I tried to explain what had happened. I was talking too fast, stumbling over the details, trying to make it sound as frightening as it had felt. But the more I explained it, the weaker it sounded. He never threatened us. He never yelled. He never followed us. Technically, nothing happened. But I have never felt my body warn me about someone like that before. As we pulled away, we passed him sitting alone farther down the terminal. He didn't look at us, but I stared at him through the window, still shaking inside, with the strongest feeling that we had narrowly avoided something I'll never be able to prove. I've never really told this story before, at least not like this. It's been about 7 years now, and even thinking about it still makes my skin tighten. I'm not someone who believes in ghosts. I'm not religious either. I've always been the kind of person who tries to explain things logically. But this? I still don't know what to do with it. Back in 2019, my girlfriend at the time, Lena, and I had just started dating. We were living in Northern California, and for weeks we'd been talking about going camping together. Just one night in a tent, somewhere quiet, somewhere a little wild. It felt exciting, like one of those early relationship adventures where everything is new and you want to make a memory. It was March, so a lot of the campgrounds up near the Sierra Nevada were still closed for the season. We knew that going in. I honestly can't remember the name of the place anymore, which bothers me a little now. We packed the car, drove a couple of hours from the Bay Area, and arrived sometime around late afternoon, maybe 4:30. The front gate was closed, so we parked there and walked the rest of the way in, about a mile down the road to the actual campground. And I want to be clear about this. We didn't see another person the entire time. No cars, no campers, no voices. Not even any sign that someone else had been there recently. Before we left, I had checked the weather. It was supposed to be cloudy, maybe chilly, but no rain. Lena felt completely fine too, which matters because of what happened later. At first, everything was beautiful. We set up the tent, walked around the empty campground, and found this quiet stretch near the water. We took pictures. We laughed. It felt peaceful in that strange, off-season way, like the whole place had been set aside just for us. Then, around early evening, Lena told me she didn't feel right. It came on suddenly. One minute she was fine, and the next she looked pale and tired. I remember joking that maybe the elevation was getting to her, trying to keep things light. We decided to eat something and rest. That was when I noticed how dark it had gotten. Not just sunset dark. It felt heavier than that. The clouds had rolled in fast, and the air had changed. I could see the trees starting to move in the wind, and the campground didn't feel quiet anymore. It felt awake. I put the rain fly over the tent, just in case, and while I was doing it, I got this feeling so strong that I actually stopped moving. Someone was watching us. I don't know how else to say it. I didn't hear a voice. I didn't see a figure. There was no obvious reason for it. But every part of me suddenly knew we were not alone out there. I looked around, shining my flashlight toward the trees, the road, the empty campsites. Nothing. But the feeling stayed. Then Lena started getting worse. Within maybe 30 or 40 minutes, she went from feeling off to coughing hard. Then she told me her chest felt tight. Then she said she was having trouble breathing. That was when the rain started. We got inside the tent. The wind wasn't terrible at first, just enough to shake the fabric a little. But after maybe 10 minutes, there was this violent blast of air, sudden and sharp, and it ripped the rain fly right off the tent. I jumped out immediately. There was nobody there. No person running away. No movement. No sound except the rain and the trees. And the strange thing is, I never felt another gust like that the rest of the night. Not even close. Standing outside in the dark, soaked and confused, I felt it again. That same watched feeling. Only this time, it was stronger. I looked back at Lena inside the tent, and she was wheezing. And something in me just snapped into focus. I had camped plenty of times before. I'd been in the mountains in snow, in freezing weather, in stupid situations where I should have planned better. Usually, I liked that kind of uncertainty. I liked the challenge. But this was different. This didn't feel adventurous. It felt wrong. I looked at the rain fly on the ground, the darkness pressing in around the campsite, and Lena struggling to breathe, and I had one clear thought. We are in danger. I told her, something isn't right. We need to leave right now. I packed everything as fast as I could. I didn't fold anything. I didn't organize anything. I just shoved it all together, grabbed what mattered, and got us moving. The walk back to the car felt much longer than a mile. The rain got harder, but the wind stayed strangely calm. And as we walked, both of us kept looking over our shoulders because we could hear something behind us. Not close enough to see, not far enough to ignore. It sounded almost like footsteps on the road, or maybe in the brush just beside it. Every time I turned the flashlight back, I could only see a short distance. The beam felt useless, like the dark was swallowing it after a few dozen feet. We started walking faster. Then we were almost jogging. By the time we reached the car, we were both scared in a way I still have trouble explaining. We threw everything inside, climbed in, and I started driving. And the moment we pulled away from that campground, the feeling faded. Not slowly, not gradually. It was just gone. Lena kept getting worse, though. Once we got back toward the Bay Area, we stopped at an emergency room. She had developed a sudden respiratory infection over the course of just a few hours. I know how that sounds. I know there are probably explanations for pieces of it. Weather changes, bad timing. Fear-making sounds seem closer than they were. But all these years later, my body still remembers that place. Even now, living far away, nowhere near that campground, I can feel the hair rising on the back of my neck when I think about it. Something was wrong there that night. And whatever it was, it did not want us to stay. I don't mind sharing this at all. I'll tell it the way I remember it, one piece at a time, because this particular thing happened more than once. And honestly, it was the thing that really scared my brother. At the time, my brother and I shared a bedroom in this old ranch-style house. We had a bunk bed, and like a lot of kids, we were usually not asleep when we were supposed to be. We'd stay up late playing Nintendo with the sound turned all the way down, trying not to get caught. I was probably around 10 or 11, sometime in the mid-90s. The strange part always started about an hour after everyone else had gone to bed. We'd hear this loud bang from the side of the room where the closet was. And I mean loud. Not a little knock, not a house settling sound, not a door shifting. The inside of that closet shared a wall with the kitchen, so we knew what the cupboards sounded like when someone shut them. And that's exactly what it sounded like. A cupboard door being slammed shut. But not from inside the closet. From the kitchen side. It would happen again and again, with no real rhythm to it. Sometimes there would be only a few seconds between bangs. Sometimes it would be closer to a minute. But every time, it sounded angry, intentional. Like someone was standing in the dark, slamming a cabinet door over and over. My brother Marcus would immediately whisper for me to turn everything off. The TV, the game, all of it. Then we'd just lie there in the dark, completely still, barely breathing. The odd thing about fear is that eventually, somehow, sleep still gets you. So I honestly don't know how long the banging usually went on. It could have been 10 minutes. It could have been much longer. I just remember that it happened a lot. Sometimes once a week, sometimes every other night, and sometimes several nights in a row. I tried to explain it away. We lived out in the California high desert, and the wind could get pretty intense out there. So for a while, I told myself maybe the wind was rattling something. But there was never any pattern. It didn't only happen on windy nights. It didn't stop when the weather was calm. That explanation never really fit. The layout of the house made it even stranger. All the bedrooms were on one side, connected by one hallway, and our room was right near the entrance to that hallway. If anyone got up and walked toward the kitchen, we would have heard them. We would have seen something. But we never did. A few times, curiosity got the better of me. I'd quietly get out of bed and check. First, I'd look in my parents' room and my sister's room just to make sure everyone was actually asleep. And they always were. Then I'd head toward the living room and kitchen. Every single time, the house would be dark and silent. No cabinet moving, no footsteps, nothing out of place. What unsettled me most was that sometimes the banging would still be happening right up until I left our room. Then the second I stepped into the hallway, it would stop. Like whatever was doing it knew I was coming. After that happened a couple of times, I stopped wanting to check. Eventually, Marcus moved out to live with his biological mother. Once he was gone, I had the room to myself, and the banging stopped. I don't remember it happening even one time after that. Not while I was trying to sleep, not while I was up late playing games, not once. Years later, I heard people talk about the idea that poltergeist activity can sometimes be connected to emotions, especially around teenagers. Anger, stress, tension, that sort of thing. I have no idea whether there's any truth to that, but I'll admit, it made me think of Marcus. He had a lot going on back then. He was insecure, angry, jealous, always wound tight. So maybe that had something to do with it. Or maybe it didn't. The part I still can't really explain is that no one else in the house ever heard it. I asked my parents and my sister about it while it was happening, and later on too. They all said they had no idea what I was talking about. That still seems impossible to me, because those bangs were so loud, I could feel them in my ears. But yeah, that house was something else, and that was only one of the things that happened there. I grew up in a house where, after a while, seeing someone who wasn't really there became almost normal. It happened to all of us. Family, visitors, everybody. Someone would catch a person moving through the house or walking past the front yard, especially near the big windows outside my parents' bedroom. We ended up calling him Benny, mostly because a few people said the figure looked blonde. To me, though, he was always just this dark shape. At least, that was true until the day I saw him in the bedroom I shared with my brother. I was walking down the hallway when, out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone in our room. Blonde hair, red shirt, about my brother's height and build, so I didn't even stop. I just assumed it was him. Then I stepped into the living room, turned toward the kitchen, and there was my sister talking to my brother. The same brother I thought I had just seen. I immediately backed up, leaned into the hallway, and looked into our room. Empty. Now, I know the obvious explanation is, maybe it was just a real person. And sure, sometimes that would be possible. But a lot of the time, it really couldn't have been. One side of our house had this tall brick wall between our yard and the neighbor's property, and there was a narrow path along it that wrapped around the house. That was usually the direction we'd see the figure walking. The problem was, that path was basically blocked off. There were sticks, scraps of wood, old boards, and random junk piled through there. You couldn't just casually walk through it. You'd have to climb over things, shove stuff aside, probably scrape yourself up, and make a ton of noise doing it. But when we saw the figure and ran outside to check, there was never anyone there. One sighting still sticks with me because it happened on one of the rare days it rained out in the high desert. We had this flower bed in front of a large bay window, though there weren't actually any flowers in it. That spot was one of the places the figure seemed to pass through all the time. The blinds were drawn that day, but the light coming in was bright enough that you could clearly see the shape of a person walking past the window. So I jumped up and went straight out the front door to follow. As usual, I found nothing. But then I noticed the ground. The desert soil was damp, and my own footprints were sharp and clear behind me. I could see exactly where I had stepped. But around that flower bed, where someone had supposedly just walked moments earlier, there were no other footprints. Not one. Then there was the night my sister had a sleepover. She and a few of her friends took over the living room, which meant it was officially off limits to us boys. As far as I knew, nothing strange happened that night, but my parents told it differently. They said they woke up to banging, girls talking, footsteps, and the sound of a whole living room full of teenagers getting loud. At first, they tried to ignore it. They wanted my sister to have fun, but after several minutes, my dad got fed up. It was the middle of the night, and their bed shared a wall with the living room, right where the TV stand was. So he got up, ready to tell them they'd had enough fun and needed to go to sleep. He opened the bedroom door, and the house was silent. The hallway was dark. No voices, no footsteps, no banging. He walked the short distance to the living room and looked in. The room was dark and quiet. The girls were all asleep, stretched out across the couches and floor. My parents said the noise continued right up until the second my dad opened the door. And the hallway was so short that there's no way those girls could have shut everything down, turned off the lights, and thrown themselves into convincing sleeping positions in the couple of seconds it took him to look in. The strangest part is, nobody else heard anything. Our bedroom also shared a wall with the living room, and I was always an extremely light sleeper. The smallest shuffle could wake me up. If there had really been that kind of noise, I absolutely would have heard it. But I heard nothing. So that's where I'll leave it for now. There were more things that happened in that house, a few that I still remember clearly, and probably some my parents could remind me of. But those moments were the ones that made the place feel less like a normal family home and more like somewhere we were quietly sharing with someone else. I think whatever this thing is, it knows I've been talking about it. And I don't think it likes that. The newest thing it started doing is mimicking my dogs. The other evening, I was inside the house when I heard something out in the yard that sounded almost like one of them. Almost, but not quite. It was warped somehow, like the sound had been copied badly and played back through something that didn't know what a dog was supposed to sound like. The second it happened, both of my dogs went absolutely frantic. They started barking, whining, crying, the whole thing. My younger dog kept racing between the back door and the big front window that looks out toward my parents' place, like he couldn't decide where the danger was coming from. And I know the dogs around here. I know their barks. I know which ones are deep, which ones are yappy, which ones echo from down the road. This wasn't any of them. There is one neighbor's dog that sometimes wanders into my yard, but she's tiny for her breed, and her bark is sharp and high-pitched. This wasn't her. This was coming from somewhere close, somewhere in my yard, and it sounded wrong. A couple nights later, I accidentally ended up sleeping at my boyfriend's apartment. I'd been sick and had slept through most of the day, then woke up around 5 in the morning, which is usually when I'm finally going to bed. I never really got back to sleep before my shift at 2 that afternoon. After work, I went over to my boyfriend's like I usually do. We grabbed food with one of his friends, hung out for a while, and after she left, we went into his room to watch something. My bed at home has been awful lately because I'm waiting on a new frame, and it's been messing up my back, so I was already hurting pretty badly. I guess I was more exhausted than I realized because I fell asleep almost right away. When I woke up, it was around 4 in the morning. I decided to head home. The drive is only about 15 minutes, and honestly, everything seemed normal at first. I saw a possum near the edge of the road and a few rabbits sitting in someone's yard, but that's not too unusual around here. Then I pulled into my driveway. It was still completely dark. The sun wasn't even starting to come up yet. When my headlights swept across the front yard, I saw something huge crouch near the old stump where we cut down the holly bush. And it was watching me. I don't know how else to say it. It was hunched there, low and still, like it was trying to blend in with the stump. But it wasn't in the right spot. There aren't any decorations there, no plants, nothing it could reasonably be mistaken for. And whatever it was far too big to be any animal we normally get around here. We don't have bears. Nothing in this neighborhood is that size. So I did what I always do. I ignored it. I didn't look directly at it again. I didn't acknowledge it. I just pulled under the carport, got out of my car, and went inside like nothing had happened. But the whole neighborhood was silent. That's the part that really got to me. At that hour, the morning birds usually start up. And it had been warm, so there should have been frogs, crickets, something. But there was nothing. No sound at all. It felt like the whole area was holding its breath. I went through my normal routine as quickly as I could. I fed the dogs, fed the cats, checked what I needed to check. But the dogs were already on edge. My younger dog completely lost it. He barked and paced and would not settle down for almost 30 minutes. My older dog was even worse. He has started screaming whenever I go outside without him, and I mean screaming. It sounds horrible, like he's being hurt, even when he can see me clearly through the window. He won't stop until I come back in. And it's not just the dogs. My cats have been acting strange too. Out of nowhere, they'll stiffen up and stare out the windows. They don't even react like that to dogs. Feral cats have started gathering around my yard more often too, which feels strange because it's like all the animals know something is there. Everything about the animals has been off. The neighborhood dogs don't go out barking at night anymore. Usually there's always at least one dog making noise somewhere, but for weeks now, they've all been quiet after dark. I haven't done anything to invite this into my space. I don't want it here. I'm going to reach out to my best friend and have her help me make protection jars, and I'm going to bury one in each corner of the yard. Whatever this thing is, it is not welcome here. I deserve to feel safe in my own home. I have proof. Real proof. At least to me. I was incredibly close to my grandmother. She had fought cancer for a long time, and before she passed, I tried once to talk with her about the idea of communicating after death. I told her about a family friend who was a gifted gardener and how she always felt her late husband reached her through little changes in her plants. My grandmother was not really open to that conversation. She kind of brushed it away. And not long after that, she was gone. At the time, I worked in tech, so I was constantly on my computer. This was years ago, when I had just started a new job and had a newer iPhone and a Mac desktop. I did not have many photos on my phone, maybe 60 or so, and my screensaver was set to rotate through them. I knew every single picture by heart. I had moved out of state for that job, away from my grandmother, but I had gone home for the holidays shortly before she died. During that visit, I took a handful of photos with 3 generations of women in my family gathered around her. Those pictures became precious to me. After she passed, I looked at them all the time. A few weeks later, I woke up at around 3 in the morning because my computer suddenly lit up. It had been asleep. I lived in a studio apartment, so the glow filled the whole room and woke me right up. The screensaver was running, but something was strange. It was only showing pictures of my grandmother. Not just the photos from my phone either. It was pulling images from everywhere. Old folders, my hard drive, online albums. Every picture had her in it. And I knew. Immediately, I knew it was her. Of course she would choose my computer. That was my world. That was where she could reach me. Some photos lingered longer than others, cycling across the screen again and again, almost like she was choosing favorites. Then the slideshow reached the holiday pictures, the ones with the women in my family surrounding her. Those 5 photos repeated over and over. And then new pictures appeared. Pictures I had never taken. They looked like the moments between the original shots. Someone leaning forward laughing. Someone turning away from the camera to talk. Motion blur, shoulder shifting, faces changing. Little in-between seconds that should not have existed. But in every single one, my grandmother was still right in the center, looking straight at the camera. This went on for maybe half an hour. I just stood there, frozen, watching it happen. Eventually, my partner came over and asked what was going on. The second he got near me, the slideshow snapped back to the normal photos from my phone. He said I had been out of bed for so long that he was worried. I told him my grandmother had visited me. I told him everything I had just seen. He gently said I was grieving, and maybe I had been dreaming or sleepwalking. And then my computer fully woke up. The screensaver stopped, and a hard drive error popped up. It said there were 45 new files that could not be reconciled. They were newly created, but somehow backdated to the holiday visit, when the original 5 photos had been taken. I opened my photo library, and there they were. A whole grid of images. 5 rows. Each row started with one of the original holiday photos, followed by 9 new ones. All those impossible in-between moments I had just seen on the screen were now sitting there on my computer. I took a screenshot of the error. I took a screenshot of the photo grid. My mother even printed that grid later and had it put on pillows and blankets for the family, as a reminder that my grandmother was still with us, still watching over us in her own quiet way. For me, proof does not get much stronger than that. And after that night, my life became different. Stranger, honestly. I had always been sensitive, and I had experienced things here and there that I could never explain. But that visit felt like it opened something. Or maybe it simply erased the last bit of doubt I had. Since then, I have had many more encounters, not just with her, but with other spirits too. But she was the first one who came through clearly. And she came through the one place she knew I would notice. My screen. I can't say what happened to you, because I wasn't there. But I can tell you what happened to me years ago, and honestly, I still think about it. I was a teenager then, still living in the old apartment with my family. We moved out a couple of years ago, but back then we lived on the 10th floor, and everything started so suddenly. The first thing I remember was my desktop computer turning on by itself. I was in my room, bending down to pick up my phone charger, and the computer was behind me. I wasn't touching it. I wasn't even close to it, maybe 1.5 meters away. Then it just powered on. That scared me badly, and that was the beginning of everything. Nothing ever hurt us, thankfully, but it was still frightening. After that, kitchen cabinets started opening on their own. Not all the time, but enough that you couldn't just laugh it off. Then, a few weeks after my dog passed away, something else happened. I was home with my sister, Lena. She had gone down to the basement, so she wasn't even in the apartment. I was alone upstairs, watching TV. I got up from the couch to change the channel, and suddenly there was this loud bang from the kitchen. It shook me. I just froze there. After that, for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, I started hearing scratching sounds at night from the kitchen floor, right where my dog used to sleep when he was alive. And the worst part is, the sound was exactly the same as the scratching he used to make. Years later, I found out my mother and Lena had heard it too, at the same time as me. They just didn't want to talk about it because it made them uncomfortable. There were other things too. One night, I felt this strange swirl of air brush against my feet. I don't really know how to describe it properly. It was like when people on ghost shows say they feel something touch them, or cold air move around them. That's the closest I can explain it. It felt deliberate, somehow. But the thing I remember most clearly, even now, was the shadow. One night, I woke up because I needed to use the bathroom. I shared a room with my sister, and she was still asleep. I could hear her snoring, and I could see her lying in her bed. Then I looked toward the balcony doors, and there was a shadow figure standing there. At that moment, my brain didn't really process it. I saw it, but somehow I didn't react the way you'd think someone would. I just went to the bathroom. When I came back, it was gone. It wasn't until the morning that it hit me properly. I had seen something standing in my room, right in front of the balcony. The strange part is, I didn't feel afraid when I saw it. Not in that moment. It was almost like my mind refused to understand what was happening until later. That ended up being the last experience I had. I don't know if that shadow was responsible for everything, or if there was more than one thing in that apartment. I really don't know. But personally, I've always felt like whatever it was wanted to be noticed. It wanted to be seen, heard, acknowledged. And I had been trying so hard to ignore everything. Maybe that's why it finally showed itself. After I saw it, everything stopped. I know some people won't believe me. Some people will say I imagined it or that I'm lying. But I know what I heard. I know what I saw. I know what I experienced. And nobody can take that away from me. I really think your emotional state matters when you tell something to leave. That night, I was beyond angry. I do not even have the right words for it. I was so furious that my brain almost clicked into autopilot. I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't careful. I was just done. And this is embarrassing, but my boyfriend Mason was laughing at me the whole time because I started throwing random little things around the room. Nothing dangerous, just small stuff nearby. I am lucky he finds my dramatic moments funny instead of alarming. At one point, I remember saying something ridiculous like, "Look at me, I'm throwing things. I'm a terrifying ghost now." Then I marched into the hallway and started opening and slamming doors. "Wow, so scary," I said. Doors opening and closing. Very impressive. Truly haunting behavior. By then, I was talking to the whole house like it had personally offended me, which, honestly, it had. I went back into the living room and said, "Do you see how stupid this looks? If you have something to say, then prove you have a brain and quietly write me a note. Otherwise, shut up and get out." Then I put a pen and a piece of paper on the table. Mason, still laughing, called out something like, "Yeah, you tell it." And no, it did not write me a note. Before that night, I had tried being polite. I had asked it to calm down. I had asked it to leave. We even tried sage once. But all of that came from this shaky, uncertain place. It felt like I was saying, "Please stop. Please listen. Look, I have sage now, so maybe this will work?" I didn't really believe myself then. But that night was different. I had hit a breaking point, and there was no question in my mind anymore. This was my home, my space. Whatever it was only there because I had allowed it to be there. I remember feeling like a parent scolding a child, and I think that is because, in my mind, it had started acting like one. It felt childish, needy, like it was doing things just to get attention. The thing that finally pushed me over the edge was how often it kept waking me up right as I was falling asleep. That was the part that got under my skin. I have a cat who will sprint into the bedroom and leap onto the bed when she wants breakfast. And for some reason, that is exactly where my brain went. Once I started thinking of this thing as an attention-seeking pet, I could not unsee it. I should also mention that I have experienced exploding head syndrome a few times. For me, it usually sounds like an extremely loud electric zack or arc, almost like static cracking right next to my head. Sometimes it is just one sharp pop. A couple of times I have heard voices too, though I suppose that could be interpreted in more than one way. These days, things are mostly quiet, but one thing still happens now and then. Maybe twice a month, the kitchen trash can lid ends up on the floor. We even started putting the lid on upside down so it sits inside the rim of the can, and somehow it still gets knocked off. It always happens during the day, and always when one of us is home. You know how, when two sound waves line up just right, they can make each other stronger? That's kind of how poltergeist activity has always felt to me. I don't mean that in a dramatic way. It's just that, in my experience, it seems to flare up more around younger people, especially teenagers, or around anyone carrying a lot of emotion under the surface. When it's happened around me, I was usually dealing with a lot internally. Not always showing it maybe, but definitely feeling it. There was this old place I used to spend time in, a little bar on the edge of town, and it had that kind of energy. Things would shift, noises would happen, people would feel watched. I've known a couple of bars like that, honestly. Places where it felt like the building already had something in it, and certain people just made it louder somehow. And I want to be really careful saying that, because I don't mean it's anyone's fault. I don't think it works like blame. It's more like a person can sometimes become an amplifier for whatever is already there. Strange, yes, but not something to feel guilty about. With paranormal things, it's easy for our minds to run off into the fog and start building castles out of guesses. And at the same time, it can feel cruel when someone immediately dismisses an experience as fake or ordinary. People can be harsh. If someone has been mocked enough, they can start doing that same mocking to themselves, turning doubt inward until it feels like proof. So I'm not here to tell you what your experience definitely is. It's yours. I believe you had it. I've had poltergeist activity happen around me too, but I do think it helps, when you can, to look at the experience from every angle. Keep room for the strange, sure, but also keep room for things like a draft, a loose shelf, a floorboard settling, or something simple hiding in plain sight. I've had enough paranormal experiences that I can't honestly say I know what's true. I'm not sure anyone really can, but I can say that I believe the paranormal is real. A while back, my sister, Marla, bought a house. She had worked hard to get there, and buying a house now is no small thing. It can feel almost impossible these days. I don't say that to make us sound fancy or anything. We're not. She went through a lot to reach that point. But that house was wrong from the beginning. There were dark presences in it, and there was also this very strong feeling of children being there. Not living children. something else. The basement was empty when we started renovating. No boxes, no furniture, no little corners where something could be hidden. The house had been vacant for a while. And in that basement, there was this small, green plastic ball. At first, we didn't think much of it, but every time we came back, the ball would be somewhere else. Not rolled a little bit across the floor. Moved. Like it had been placed in a new spot. The childlike energy in that house was so strong that Marla and I finally decided to throw the ball away. It felt connected to whatever was making itself known. We tossed it out, and the trash was taken. Then we came back, and there was another green ball in the basement. Same kind, same color. We got rid of that one too. Then another one appeared. After the third one, it stopped. The balls stopped showing up, and that childlike presence quieted down a lot. It didn't vanish completely, but it wasn't so loud anymore. Months later, we found a green ball outside the house. Same type, but crushed. The others had already been taken away with the trash, so it wasn't like they had just rolled back. Now, could someone have been breaking into the house to play some long, weird prank? Sure. Stranger things have happened. But we checked. We set little tricks to see if anyone was getting inside while we were gone. Nothing. No signs of entry. No evidence of anyone coming or going. And honestly, when paranormal activity has been normal for both you and someone close to you, Occam's razor starts looking a little different. That house had a lot going on. More than just the green balls. So whatever is happening around you, I hope you're able to stay calm with it. That's helped me more than anything. A lot of paranormal things don't seem to need fear from us. Sometimes they're just there, moving through their own strange day, while we happen to be nearby. I've always been the kind of person who questions stories like this. I still do, honestly. I hear a lot of paranormal stories, and my first instinct is usually to look for the reasonable explanation. But there's one thing that happened to me when I was younger that I've never been able to explain. I was about 19 at the time, sitting alone at my buddy Darren's house, playing a skating game on his old PlayStation while I waited for another friend to finish his shift. We were supposed to go look at apartments afterward, so I was just killing time in the living room. While I was playing, the front door opened behind me. I could see it in the reflection of the TV. Someone walked in. The door shut, and I heard footsteps coming across the room, right behind the couch. It sounded completely normal, like somebody had just come home. I assumed it was my friend, so without turning around I said, "What's up?" No answer. Then I heard the footsteps keep going, and a second later, his bedroom door slammed shut. That's when I looked at the clock and realized he wasn't supposed to be off work for almost 2 more hours. My first thought was that maybe he'd gotten fired or had some kind of bad day, so I got up and went to check on him. But there was nobody in the bedroom. There wasn't really anywhere to hide either. He had a mattress on the floor and barely any furniture. I checked the closet. Nothing. Then I started thinking maybe someone had come into the house who wasn't supposed to be there, so I checked the windows. Every one of them was closed and locked. I went through the whole house, confused and getting more uneasy by the second. And then it hit me. Nobody could have walked in, crossed that room, slammed that door, and disappeared. That was when I got genuinely scared. I left the house and walked straight to the fast food place where my friend was working. I told him what had happened, and that was the first time anyone told me the house had a reputation. He said he'd never experienced anything himself, but apparently it was part of the reason his mom had moved out and left him the place. She used to say that at night, while she was trying to sleep. She would feel fingers running through her hair, even though nobody was there. A few of our other friends had experienced small things in that house too, but nothing as clear as what happened to me. Nobody laughed when I told them. Nobody acted like it was some big joke. They were serious, and honestly, that made it feel even stranger. I stayed at the restaurant until my friend got off work, and after that, I never stayed in that house alone again. I'm not religious. I'm not superstitious. I've always thought of myself as pretty grounded and scientific-minded. But I also think there are things we just don't understand yet. I'm sure there's some explanation, but I've never found one that actually fits. An intruder is the only normal explanation I can even imagine. But where would they have gone? I checked everywhere. There was nowhere to hide. And the thing is, I wouldn't have searched the house like that if it had felt vague or dreamlike. It didn't. It was clear. I saw the reflection, heard the door, heard the footsteps, heard the bedroom door slam. It was real enough that I reacted like anyone would. Years later, after my friend had sold the house, I drove by out of curiosity. A family was living there then. They were all sitting outside in front of the house, not playing, not talking much, just sitting there, quiet, like they didn't want to be inside but had nowhere else to go. I still think about that sometimes. I'm going to take you back a little bit because this story really starts with my Nan. I was mostly raised by her. She was my safe place, really. Toward the end of her life, she came to stay with my mom and me in our little flat, and that's where she passed away. At home, with us. There's a lot of history behind that. I grew up with different kinds of neglect and abuse, and my mental health was already in a fragile place from a pretty young age. My mom had her own serious struggles with addiction and mental illness, so when my Nan died, I was left to grieve her almost completely on my own. One night, not long after she passed, I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, facing the window. I was absolutely broken. I looked up at the sky and said out loud, "I need you. Please, I just want to see you." I was begging into this huge, empty nothing. Eventually, I calmed myself down enough to sleep. And honestly, because very low nights weren't unusual for me back then, I sort of buried it and moved on. A few weeks later, I had another awful night. I don't remember calling out for my Nan that time, but I must have fallen asleep at some point because suddenly I was jolted awake by 3 clear knocks. Not vague noises, not the building settling. 3 distinct knocks. They came from the right-hand corner of my room, where the door to my little walk-in wardrobe met the bedroom door. I remember staring straight at the door, completely startled. But strangely, I didn't feel scared. I felt this beautiful rush of relief, like she'd come to me somehow, like she was letting me know I wasn't as alone as I thought. After that, I felt better, lighter somehow. Then the 3 knocks happened 2 more times. What really unsettled me was that they came at almost the same time each night, somewhere around 3:10 in the morning. So, of course, I started looking it up. I wanted to know what my Nan might have been trying to tell me. At first, I was excited. I honestly felt protected, like my own little guardian angel had found a way through. But then I read that 3 knocks can sometimes be seen as a mockery of the Holy Trinity. And that made my stomach drop, because my Nan was deeply religious. When I was little, I used to share a bed with her, and every single night I'd see her clasp her hands and whisper her prayers, without fail. That was who she was. So the idea that she would mock something sacred didn't feel right, not even slightly. Then I kept reading, which was probably not my finest idea, and I saw people saying that darker spirits can be drawn to people when they're vulnerable. And I started thinking about the nights I'd cried out, The nights I'd begged for someone to come. I wondered, did something hear me? Not her. Something else. For a while, I tried to push that thought away. I didn't want to give it power. But then one night, around the same time again, I woke up suddenly. My eyes just snapped open. And this time, there was no comfort. My whole body reacted before my brain did. My heart dropped, my stomach twisted, and I felt threatened. Completely threatened. I sat upright in bed and shouted, "Go away!" And after that, the knocking stopped. Years later, I moved out of that flat. I was 23, and for a while I sofa surfed and stayed briefly with my dad. Eventually, in 2018, I finally got my own space. It was a house share, but I was lucky. I lived with two kind, easygoing women, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. Around then, I started seeing someone. I'll call him Jay. He's actually the father of my children now. Back then, I was happy. Properly happy. I felt free. I thought of my Nan only with love, and I'd built a much healthier relationship with my faith. Then one night, Jay stayed over. Nothing unusual about that. We watched TV, fell asleep, and everything felt completely normal. But the next morning, I rolled over for those early relationship cuddles, and the look on his face stopped me cold. He looked terrified. Not half asleep, not confused, terrified. I asked him what was wrong, and at first he was quiet. Then he said, "I don't know. I think it was a dream." Obviously, that didn't calm me down. I kept asking, and eventually he said, "I don't think you want to know." Well, of course that made me want to know immediately. So he told me. He said, "I heard someone knock at the bedroom door, and it woke me up." I opened my eyes because I thought it might be one of the girls. Then I saw something. It was tall and dark, standing in the corner of your room behind the mirror. It walked out, went around the bottom of the bed, came up the left side, leaned over you, and said your name. I asked him what he did. He said he just closed his eyes because he thought it had to be a dream, and he was too frightened to move. But here's the thing. I had never told him about the 3 knocks. Never. And honestly, why would I? It's not exactly first date material, is it? By the way, during one of the worst periods of my life, I started hearing knocks in my bedroom at 3 in the morning. No thank you. So I just sat there for a moment, trying to absorb what he'd said. Then I asked him if he wanted to hear something strange. I told him the whole story, and he went white. Since that morning, I've never been disturbed by the knocks again. I do believe something came to me when I was weak, when I was calling out into the dark and desperate for comfort. I don't think it was my Nan. Not anymore. I also later found out that some people say you shouldn't sleep with mirrors facing your bed, so apparently I really did leave the spiritual front door on the latch there. But that's my experience with whatever else might be out there. These days, my mental health is much better managed. I'm stronger, more grounded, and much more resilient. My faith is still important to me, and I'm also deeply interested in spiritual things, but I don't feel helpless around them anymore. If I ever had to face something like that again, I genuinely believe I'd know how to stand my ground. So yes, that's my strange little glimpse into something I still can't fully explain. I still think about this night more than I probably should. This happened before COVID, around 2018 or 2019, so I was maybe 13 or 14. I grew up in western Pennsylvania, right near the edge of the Appalachian Mountains, so when I say certain places out there already have a strange feeling to them, I mean that in the most serious way. My uncle, Rick, lived about 5 minutes down the road from us. His house was big, kind of tucked away, with woods on one side and a field on the other. I had already had a few strange experiences there before, but this one is the one that stayed with me. My mom and I were house sitting for him while he was away for work. He didn't have pets or anything, so it was just the two of us in this large, quiet house. That night, we were down in the basement watching a movie. The layout matters here. Across from the TV, the whole wall was basically windows, with French doors leading out to the back patio and pool. Since my uncle wasn't home, none of the outdoor lights were on, so beyond those doors it was completely black. Not dim, not shadowy, just black. We were sitting on this L-shaped couch with our backs to the windows. At some point, I heard this very specific sound. It was that hollow little tap you hear when someone knocks once on a big glass door. Just one knock. I sat up and looked over the back of the couch, but there was nothing there. Just darkness. I told myself maybe I had imagined it and went back to watching the movie. My mom didn't react at all, so I figured she hadn't heard it. Then it happened again. This time, when I looked back, I saw my dad standing outside. And I don't mean something that sort of looked like him. I mean it looked exactly like him. He was wearing his work hat and this old, faded gray Steelers crew neck he used to wear all the time. He was looking down at his phone, and the screen was lighting up his face and part of his chest. I could only see him from about mid-torso up. He wasn't moving. He wasn't knocking again. He was just standing there, staring down at his phone. I turned to my mom, completely confused, and said something like, "Dad's here." It was around 1:30 in the morning, so that already didn't make sense. My mom looked back at the doors and saw nothing, but I could still see him. Clear as day. She told me he was at home asleep and had work in the morning. I looked back toward the TV for a second, then turned around again, and he was still there. Same position, same clothes, still looking down at his phone. Still not moving. At that point, I wasn't even scared yet. I was more confused than anything. I told her again that he was outside and that we should let him in. I don't remember exactly what she said after that, but eventually I just turned back around and acted like I didn't see anything. I don't remember falling asleep, but somehow I did. The next morning, I called my dad and asked if he had come over the night before. He said no. But the strange part is, he didn't laugh it off. He said he believed me, and that he believed I really saw something. I told my uncle about it too, and asked him to check the cameras, but he never did, or at least he never told me what was on them. So I'm guessing he didn't really believe me. But I know what I saw. And whatever was standing outside those glass doors that night, it looked exactly like my dad. I've told this story before, and I always feel like I need to say up front that it isn't scary in a dramatic movie trailer kind of way. It's more unsettling, because even after all this time, I still don't have a clean answer for what happened. I'm not going to say exactly where it was, because the place has always been very firm about being officially not haunted. And honestly, I understand why. It was a living history museum, the kind of place where people come to see old buildings, demonstrations, crafts, schoolhouses, train rides, all of that. They already got enough ghost questions every year without me adding fuel to the little lantern. But despite the official line, there were stories. Plenty of them. Some were the kind you could shrug off. A lot of the buildings had employee-only areas, and most staff were in period clothing. So if someone said they saw a figure in an upstairs room or passing through a doorway, well, It might have just been someone working. Not every shadow gets to be a ghost. Other stories were harder to dismiss. I knew people who had seen or heard things themselves. One of the security supervisors, a guy I'll call Martin, had a few stories that made even the most practical employees go quiet. 2 guards under him apparently quit after experiences of their own. I also had one coworker who left after hearing too many stories, which sounds funny until you've worked in those old buildings after the guests thin out. Anyway, one summer day, I was working as a break person. That meant I rotated through a few buildings so the staff there could take lunch, bathroom breaks, or 15-minute breathers. One of my buildings that shift was the one-room schoolhouse. It was a quiet weekday. The kind of quiet where you can hear the old woods settle and suddenly become very aware of every little tick and creak. Most of the guests were off riding the train, on the boat, eating, or scattered somewhere else in the museum. So when I relieved the schoolhouse interpreter, I had about 30 minutes to myself. That summer, the schoolhouse was being used as a craft station. I don't remember the exact craft anymore, but I remember construction paper and glue sticks being involved. Lots of glue sticks. Now, I had been watching ghost hunting shows around that time, and I knew the schoolhouse was one of the buildings people whispered about. So, because apparently I had the self-preservation instincts of a wet paper bag, I started talking out loud. Not loudly. Just casually. I said something like, "All right, if you're here, knock over one of the glue sticks." I was standing near the front of the classroom, by the teacher's area. The entrance was at the opposite end of the room. At the front, there was a little raised platform, actually 2 levels, with a flag and chair on one part and the teacher's podium desk on the other. One thing about that building, a lot of the nails in that front section were these long, flat, old-fashioned nails. I only mention that because it matters. So I'm standing there, facing the teacher's podium, talking to the supposed ghost like a fool with a name tag. I look around. Nothing weird. Nothing on the floor. Nothing out of place. Then I turn around toward the entrance, partly to check the glue sticks and partly to see if any guests are coming in. No glue sticks have moved. Nobody's walking by. Nothing. I turn back around maybe 30 seconds later, and now there is a long, flat nail lying on the floor. Right there. It had not been there before. I know it hadn't. And the way it was positioned made absolutely no sense. The only place it could have come from, as far as I could tell, was the teacher's desk or the platform area. But I checked. Nothing looked missing. No loose spot. No obvious hole where a nail had just dropped out. It was just suddenly there, like the building had politely decided not to knock over a glue stick and instead offered me something much worse. I stopped talking after that. When my coworker came back, I didn't mention the ghost at all. I just showed her the nail and said, "Hey, I found this on the ground. I'm not sure where it came from." She looked just as confused as I felt. We agreed we'd tell either a supervisor or someone from maintenance, whoever we saw first. And that wasn't the only strange nail incident I had in that schoolhouse, but it's the only one I've never been able to explain away. The schoolhouse had a wood-burning stove, though it wasn't used anymore. It was just decorative by then, since the building had a modern heating system installed after it was moved to the museum. During December shifts, we'd often find little screws or nails sitting on top of the stove. Our best guess was that either guests were putting them there or maintenance was leaving them behind somehow. We always checked the stove at the start of the shift, and by halfway through the day, something would sometimes appear on it. That was odd, but not impossible. Later that same year, during a December shift, I found another long, flat nail in a weird place. This time it was sticking halfway out of one of the student desks. I always checked the desks at the start and end of a shift, mostly for things guests had left behind, or craft supplies that had gotten shoved inside. That month we were making ornaments, so there were always bits and pieces to clean up. But this nail wasn't just lying there. It was partly pulled out of the desk, like anyone had started removing it and then stopped. I don't know if maintenance had done it while cleaning before opening. Maybe they had. Maybe there's a perfectly ordinary explanation tucked away somewhere. But the coworker with me that day had been laughing earlier when I mentioned my little habit of checking for strange things in that building. After I found the nail, she stopped laughing. And not long after that, she quit. I used to leave my body when I was little. That's the simplest way I know how to say it, even though there's nothing simple about it. I would float up near the ceiling, kind of drifting in this slow figure-8 pattern above my parents while they talked downstairs or moved around the house at night. And the next morning, I'd tell them what they'd said. I'd tell them where they hid the cookies or which cabinet they'd tucked the chips into, little things I shouldn't have known. They'd just stare at me, completely confused, because there was no way I could have heard or seen any of it from my room. One night, I had an experience that stayed with me for the rest of my life. I left my body and found myself moving through this tunnel. When I came out the other side, I was in a dark, empty place. One side looked dead, like nothing could grow there, nothing could breathe there. But farther away, across what looked like a bridge, everything seemed alive. Not just alive, but pulsing with life. Then I was told, very clearly, that I wasn't supposed to be there. And just like that, I was pulled back through the tunnel and into my house. But I was still out of my body. I started looking for my family, but nobody was inside. Then I realized they were all outside dealing with the animals, because part of the fence had come down on the farm. Behind the barn, I saw one of our horses caught in the wire. I tried to tell my mother. I was right there near her, trying to get her attention, but she couldn't see me. She couldn't hear me. I remember feeling this awful helplessness, like I was shouting underwater. So I went back into the house, laid back into my body, and woke up. I ran straight to the door, but it was locked. I pounded on it until my mother came inside. I told her about the horse, and she asked me how I knew. So I told her everything. I told her I left my body. I told her that was how I knew what happened at night, how I knew where things were hidden, how I knew conversations I shouldn't have heard. She looked stunned. Then she told me never to talk about it again. Later, when I was older and living in a different house, I started hearing my name being called in my mother's voice. Loud and clear. But she wasn't there. And it wasn't just me. Friends heard it. Roommates heard it. They'd look up and say, "Did your mom just call you?" But it wasn't her. Other things happened too. I felt my feet get pulled hard while I was in bed. I felt someone press down beside me, like they were sitting on the mattress. My grandmother, my roommate, and a couple of friends all saw what looked like a person walking up the front path toward the house. But no one was there. There was nowhere for that person to go either. It was right in front of a big picture window, not even 10 feet away. One moment they were walking up, and the next, nothing. In the early 70s, I had an experience that felt like some kind of download. It came through as automatic writing, and it looked like binary code. At the time, I didn't even really know what I was looking at. Years later, when I saw binary code for the first time and understood what it was, I screamed. There was a message attached to that experience too, but I don't share it. I don't have proof. I don't have a witness. And honestly, some things feel too heavy to hand over casually. My family had their own experiences. My grandparents and my mother, who was pregnant at the time, saw a UFO in the mountains of Pennsylvania in the mid-60s. They were driving near a ridge when this object appeared and just hung there in the trees in front of them for several minutes. Because of where they were on the crest of the road, it was almost level with them. My grandfather contacted authorities he knew, and apparently other people had reported seeing it too. I didn't find out about that until I was around 19. They never talked about it. These were serious, practical people, not the kind who went looking for attention or strange stories. My grandmother had something happen too. In the middle of the day, a person came to her and asked her to go to a certain mountain and say a specific prayer so he could go home. She was told never to reveal his name or who he was. She did what he asked. Even on her deathbed, she wouldn't tell me his name. She wouldn't say what he looked like or what he wore. She kept that promise all the way to the end. And these are just a few things. I could keep going. I know how all of this sounds. Believe me, I do. I spent about 15 years refusing to think about any of it because it felt impossible. It felt crazy. It felt easier to lock it all away and live like none of it happened. But it did happen. I have no reason to make it up. I have a family. I have a successful business. I live a normal life in every visible way. I'm just trying to understand what has been going on. So if anyone else has experienced anything similar, you can message me. Or if you want to hear more, I can tell more. Because at this point, I'm tired of pretending the strange parts of my life were never real. I want to tell this the way I remember it, because for a long time, I tried to explain it away. For more than 10 years, my family saw things in our house. Shadow figures mostly. They didn't start right when we moved in either. We had already been living there for about 4 or 5 years before anything really began happening. At first, my husband, Daniel, was the one who saw them. Then my 2 kids started seeing them too. One of them described a man who looked completely black, like a shadow, but shaped clearly like a person. He wore what looked like an old-fashioned hat and a dark suit, and he would stand in the doorway of their room, just staring. There were other things too. Some looked like shadowy shapes with eyes or teeth. Some had no face at all. I kept telling myself they were dreams, or fear, or kids' imaginations running wild. Then one night, I saw one too. My younger son, Noah, was about 10 at the time. He's older now, but I still remember that night so clearly. He was sitting beside me on my bed, and the kitchen light was on behind the doorway to my room. Suddenly, I saw what looked like a child standing there. Not a flat shadow on the wall. It was standing there, 3-dimensional, right in the doorway. It looked like a small child made entirely of darkness. I couldn't see a face. I thought it might have been wearing a little shirt, but the strangest part was the light behind it. The kitchen light should have touched it somehow, should have shown something, but it didn't. The light just seemed to stop around it. I blinked, and it was gone. For a second, I was ready to tell myself it was just my eyes playing tricks on me. But then Noah jumped beside me. He started crying, completely terrified, and he was staring at the same doorway. I asked him, "Did you just see a shadow that looked like a kid?" He couldn't even answer out loud. He just nodded. That was the moment everything changed for me. We had both seen the same thing. I immediately started praying over us, over the room, over the house. I prayed for protection, for God's presence, for anything evil to leave. We didn't see anything else that night, but we also didn't sleep. We left the lights on and stayed in that bed until morning. The next day, I told Daniel what had happened. He had slept in the living room that night because his back was bothering him, and when I told him, he admitted he had been seeing that childlike shadow and other figures in the house for a while. He just hadn't told me. Around that same time, I found out something else. Daniel had been having hallucinations for years, even before we were together. I knew he had always had strange experiences, things he described as spiritual or supernatural, but I didn't know how much he had kept hidden. Later, he was diagnosed with schizoaffective bipolar disorder, and he also lived with CPTSD. But that still didn't explain what happened to me and Noah. It didn't explain why more than one person saw the same things. And honestly, that was what shook me. Before that night, I had been quietly dismissing what my family was saying because I hadn't seen it myself. Once I did, I had to rethink everything I believed about mental health, spiritual warfare, and the paranormal. I do believe some hallucinations are the brain misfiring. I really do. But I also believe there can be something spiritual behind certain experiences, especially when more than one person is seeing or hearing the same thing. For years, it continued. Daniel would see people or creatures standing around the house or running through rooms. Sometimes he heard whispering. Sometimes he could understand it. Sometimes he couldn't. When he could, the things being said were awful. My son began struggling too. He was seeing and hearing things, and at one point, the voices were telling him to hurt himself. He did try to take his life, but thank God he survived. He's okay now, and I don't say that lightly. I'm grateful every day. We tried so many things to get peace back into our home. I recommitted myself to Jesus. I prayed protection over the house. I prayed out loud. I played worship music during the day and listened to the Bible at night. I memorized scripture and spoke it when I felt afraid. A lot of the time, it helped. But it didn't always feel permanent, especially when we kept bringing dark things back into the house through what we watched or listened to. That's what I believe now. I think certain things can open doors spiritually, even if we don't mean for them to. Eventually, it got bad enough that we asked a Catholic priest to come bless the house. He prayed, read scripture, and blessed the rooms, especially the beds. About a week later, some Carities ministers came and prayed through the house too. I truly believe those prayers helped. I would tell anyone dealing with something like this to stay proactive. Don't erase. That part matters more than people realize. Isolation can become dangerous, especially when someone is already struggling mentally or spiritually. You need prayer, support, community, and people who will take you seriously without feeding fear. Daniel passed away last year. Since then, the house has felt different. Much quieter. I hardly sense anything now. He had told me before that he believed dark things had attached themselves to him because of things that happened to him earlier in life. He felt like they thought they owned him, but they didn't. We also stopped watching and listening to the darker stuff. I know not everyone will agree with me, but I believe scary movies, dark music, occult content, and even just being curious can invite things in. I've noticed it in my own life. Anytime I start digging into creepy or spiritually dark things, the fear and heaviness seem to come back. Could someone say it was imagination? Sure. I understand why people would think that. But too many things happened that more than one person witnessed. Too many moments lined up. Too many times someone else saw what I saw before either of us said a word. And for anyone who says these things are just spirit guides, I don't believe that. I believe they're deceptive spirits. I believe they pretend to be harmless or helpful or mysterious, but they are not. When I sense something now, I speak out loud. I tell it to leave in Jesus' name. That has worked for me, but I also believe you have to actually trust the name you're using. It isn't a magic phrase. It's faith. I'm sharing this because when it was happening, I tried to research shadow figures and couldn't find much that helped me. Maybe hearing our story will help someone else feel less alone. This is only my family's experience, and it's my honest opinion. Take it for what it is. I want to tell you a story my father used to tell. about a weekend he spent with his closest friend Marlon, back around the early 90s. They were both musicians at the time, and because they each had young families, finding peace and quiet to actually write music was almost impossible. There was always noise, always someone needing something, always life tapping them on the shoulder. So they came up with what seemed like a perfect idea: rent a little cottage somewhere remote, bring their keyboards and recording gear, and spend the whole weekend writing songs. They ended up finding this old stone miner's cottage near Minehead in England. It was tucked away in the countryside, very pretty in that lonely sort of way. Hardly any cars passed by. There weren't really any neighbors close enough to notice, and the whole place looked peaceful from the outside. But the moment my father stepped through the door, he felt something was wrong. At the time, both he and Marlon were involved in spiritual mediumship, so they were used to picking up on odd atmospheres. And this place had one. My father always described it as heavy, cold, and unfriendly, almost like the cottage itself didn't want them there. Still, they had already paid for the weekend, so they tried to brush it off. They set up their keyboards in the front room and got to work. The cottage itself was simple: a small wooden front door, a kitchen at the back with another door leading into a little garden, and upstairs there were 2 bedrooms and a bathroom. For the first part of the night, nothing dramatic happened, just small things. A glass of water that seemed to empty itself without explanation. That thick, unpleasant feeling in the air getting worse. The kind of silence that doesn't feel quiet, but watchful. Then, while they were sitting downstairs talking through a piece of music, there were 2 loud bangs on the front door. My father thought it might be the elderly woman who owned the place, since she lived a little way up the road. So he went to answer it. Nobody was there. Just darkness, fields, and the stillness of the countryside. He came back inside, and a few minutes later, the banging started again. This time, both of them rushed to the door and opened it quickly. Again, nothing. And then, almost straight away, the same banging came from the back door. Marlon grabbed a flashlight and ran through the kitchen into the garden. But there was no one there either. No footsteps. No figure running off. Nothing that could explain it. That went on for a while. Front door, back door, silence. Then more banging. By then, neither of them felt brave. They packed away what they could, decided the music could wait, and went upstairs to try to sleep. My father took a book to bed because he wanted to calm himself down. He managed to drift into a light sleep sometime around 1 in the morning. Then he woke up to Marlon screaming. Not shouting, screaming. The kind of scream that makes your body move before your mind catches up. My father ran into his room and found him curled up in the corner, shaking. Marlon said he had woken to see a large, rough-looking man climbing into the bed with him. They searched the entire cottage, every room, every cupboard, behind every door. There was no one there. Marlon was badly shaken, so my father said he'd stay in the room with him for the rest of the night. And because my father always tried to cut tension with humor, he made a silly joke. Something like, "Maybe the ghost just likes you and wanted a cuddle." The moment he said it, Marlon's heavy walking boots lifted from across the room and flew straight at my father, hitting him on the head. That was enough. They both went downstairs and stayed there until morning, not sleeping properly, just waiting for daylight to arrive. The next day, before leaving, they told the owner what had happened. She seemed genuinely surprised and said she had never heard of that cottage being haunted. Apparently, she owned another property nearby, and that one was known for strange activity. Which is funny because the following year, my parents actually rented the same miner's cottage for a family holiday. And nothing happened. No banging doors, no flying boots, no shadowy man in the bedroom. Just a quiet little cottage in the countryside. But my father never forgot that first weekend. To him, it always felt like the place had made its point very clearly. It wasn't in the mood for music. I've been part of this group for quite a while, just quietly reading other people's stories. But this is actually my first time sharing anything of my own. Over the years, I've had a few experiences I still can't fully explain. Only a handful of people close to me know about them, but I've been feeling like it's time to start telling them. So I figured I'd begin with one of the earliest ones. This happened a little over 10 years ago, back when I was living at my dad's place. He was out of town for a week, and I had invited a few friends over for a small cookout. Nothing big, just burgers on the grill, drinks on the back patio, and one of those easy afternoons where nobody is in a hurry to leave. There were maybe 5 or 6 of us outside. At some point, I told my friend Mason that I wanted to show him a video on my computer, so the two of us went inside. We came in through the back door, walked through the kitchen, crossed into the living room, and went upstairs to my bedroom. The layout matters a little here, so I'll try to explain it clearly. From the kitchen, there was an open doorway into the living room. Once you stepped into the living room, the stairs were immediately off to the right. There were a couple of steps, then a small landing, then another set of stairs going up to the second floor. At the top, you could turn left toward a spare bedroom, or right toward my room. Mason and I were upstairs for around 10 minutes, maybe a little longer, just looking at videos and messing around on the computer. Then we decided to head back outside with everyone else. I walked out of my room first, with Mason behind me. I started down the stairs, and right as I reached the bottom, I saw a man walk directly across the living room. He came from the kitchen area, crossed right in front of me, and headed straight into what used to be my dad's bedroom, which was just off the living room. And when I say I saw him, I mean I saw him clearly. He didn't look misty. He wasn't glowing. He wasn't see-through. He looked like a completely normal person. Just a man in casual clothes, walking through the house like he belonged there. The strange thing was, the second I saw him, my body locked up. I wasn't scared exactly. I didn't feel threatened. It was more like my brain had hit a wall, and my body didn't know what to do next. After he went into my dad's room, I stood there for a second, trying to make sense of it. My first thought was that maybe someone had come inside with one of my friends, or maybe somebody had shown up while we were upstairs. But then something felt wrong. I hadn't heard the bedroom door open. I hadn't heard it close either. So I walked over to the door, and sure enough, it was still shut. That was the moment my stomach dropped a little. I told Mason what I had just seen, and we both decided to check the room. We opened the door, looked around, checked the obvious places, but there was nobody there. No sound, no movement, no trace of anyone having gone in. Nothing. I still think about how solid he looked. That is the part that stays with me. If he had looked ghostly, maybe my mind would have put him into some familiar category. But he looked alive. Ordinary. Real. The house itself was around a century old at that point, so plenty of people had lived there before us. I've wondered sometimes if I didn't see a ghost in the way people usually describe them, but more like I accidentally stepped into some old imprint of the house. A moment that had already happened, still replaying itself somehow. After that day, I never saw that man again. I lived in that house for a few more years, and there were other things that happened there too. Honestly, compared to some of those, this was one of the quieter experiences. But it was the first one that made me stop and think, all right, something is definitely going on here. I should probably give you a little background first. When I was younger, me and 2 of my closest friends were really into ghost hunting. Not professionally or anything like that. More like curious kids with too much bravery and not enough common sense. We'd go wandering through cemeteries, poke around old abandoned houses, and visit places people swore were haunted. just to see if anything would actually happen. Around that same time, I got interested in darker occult-type books too. I remember reading a copy of the Necronomicon mostly out of curiosity, because it fit the kind of stuff I was into back then. These days, that book is packed away in a plastic bin in my basement, and I honestly haven't touched it in years. Over time, I've had a handful of strange experiences that I still can't explain. At my old place, I once saw what looked like a man walk straight through a bedroom door. And I don't mean a shadow or some blurry shape. I mean he looked like an actual person, solid and clear, the way anyone would look if they walked past you. But when I went into that room, nobody was there. Another time, I was standing alone in my kitchen when I suddenly heard a woman's voice right beside my ear. She was speaking in a language I didn't recognize, and it was so close it felt like she was standing inches away from me. But I was completely alone. Still, the strongest experience I ever had happened when I was in my mid-20s. The house I was living in back then was old, and it had this heavy feeling to it. I always had the sense that someone was watching me, or that something was walking just behind me when I moved through the rooms. Even now, thinking about that feeling gives me chills. It wasn't dramatic. It was just constant, quiet, pressing. One night, I was lying in bed watching a movie. It was late, and by the time the movie ended, I was exhausted. So I turned off the TV, shut off the lights, and settled under the blanket to go to sleep. Almost right away, I got this overwhelming feeling that someone was standing at the foot of my bed. I didn't say anything out loud. I just thought in my head, please, just let me sleep. I'm too tired for this. And not even 2 seconds later, the blanket was yanked off me. Not gently, not like it slipped. It was pulled hard enough that it ended up bunched down around my feet. I shot up, reached for the lamp, and turned the lights on as fast as I could. I looked around the room, trying to make sense of what had just happened. But there was nothing there. No one standing by the bed, no open window, nothing that could have grabbed the blanket. I don't think I need to tell you, I didn't sleep much after that. The lights stayed on for the rest of the night. That was one of the last things that happened before I moved out of that house, and it was definitely the most intense. I'd experienced other things before, but nothing had ever felt that close. I want to start by saying that I know this might have a perfectly normal explanation. I really do. It could have been stress. It could have been some kind of delayed reaction to a dream I don't remember. I'm not someone who has paranormal experiences often, even though I do enjoy watching ghost investigations online now and then, mostly just for entertainment. I wouldn't call myself a full skeptic, but I'm definitely the kind of person who looks for the logical answer first. And before I get into it, I should say this story touches on harm involving children, so please take care of yourself if that's something you don't want to hear about. This happened last night. Most of the night was completely normal. I went to bed around 11:15, listened to a quiet playlist for a while, and eventually fell asleep. I slept pretty deeply until a little after 4 in the morning. Now, waking up randomly in the early hours isn't strange for me. Sometimes I need water. Sometimes I need the bathroom. Sometimes my body just decides we're awake now for no good reason. Usually, I roll over and fall right back asleep. But this time felt different. The second I opened my eyes, I felt this pressure on my chest. Not heavy exactly, not painful. I could breathe. It didn't feel like a person sitting on me, but it was noticeable enough that I immediately sat up and looked around. My room was dark, but my eyes had adjusted enough that I could make out the furniture, the doorway, the shape of everything. There was nothing there. No figure, no sound, Nothing standing near my bed, nothing at the foot of it. So I told myself it was probably sleep paralysis. I've had that before, more often than anything I'd ever call paranormal. It doesn't happen constantly, but I know what it feels like. And honestly, I was ready to accept that and move on. But once I calmed down and laid back again, that's when it started. The moment I closed my eyes, I was hit with these awful images. Not like a dream, not like a memory, but like someone had forced a film reel into my mind and pressed play. I saw children suffering, children being hurt by adults, children trapped in small spaces, children crying, sick, terrified, and completely helpless. It came all at once, image after image, and it was so sudden and so cruel that I started crying almost immediately. I need to be clear, I was awake, fully awake. I had just sat up, checked the room, talked myself down, and laid back again. I wasn't drifting off. I wasn't in the middle of a dream. I was awake enough to know I did not want to be seeing any of it. And then came the worst part. Along with those images, I felt this wave of guilt that made no sense. I knew, logically, that none of it had anything to do with me. I knew these were images in my head. But the feeling was so strong, it was like something wanted me to believe I was responsible. It didn't feel like my own emotion. That's the part I keep coming back to. It felt placed there, like I was being made to hold someone else's horror, someone else's shame, someone else's grief. There was no voice, no presence I could see. Nothing in the room changed. But emotionally, it felt like I wasn't alone with it. I was too scared to close my eyes again, so I sat up and grabbed my phone. I stayed like that for hours, scrolling through random things just to keep myself grounded, trying to distract myself from that horrible, false guilt sitting in my chest. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep sitting up, because around 7:45 in the morning, I woke up with my phone resting on me. The feeling was gone by then. No guilt, no fresh images, just the memory of what had happened, sharp and clear. And I still remember all of it. I know this isn't some dramatic story about seeing a shadow person in the corner or hearing footsteps in an empty hallway. I know most of it happened inside my mind, which makes it almost impossible to prove or explain. But I'm telling you, as honestly as I can, it felt real while it was happening. I didn't watch anything paranormal yesterday. I didn't read anything disturbing before bed. I wasn't thinking about ghosts or hauntings or anything like that. I just listened to music and fell asleep like I normally would. So now I'm left wondering what that was. A waking nightmare? Some leftover fear from a dream I don't remember? Sleep paralysis bleeding into something worse? Or something else entirely? I don't know. I just know that I can't stop thinking about those faces. I can't stop thinking about the sadness in them. And I can't shake the feeling that, for a few hours in the dark, I was carrying pain that didn't belong to me. I want to tell you about something that happened twice in our house, but in this strange, mirrored way. The first time, it happened to my dad. The second time, it happened to me. This was back when I was in high school, probably around 5 or 6 years ago. My dad and I didn't usually get home at the same time, especially because I often had dance practice after school. But every once in a while, our schedules lined up close enough that one of us would arrive not long before the other. On the first day it happened, my dad got home before me. He knew right away that he was alone because my little blue car wasn't in the driveway yet. He came inside through the garage like he always did, set his things down, and went into the bathroom on the first floor. While he was in there, he heard what sounded exactly like me coming in through the garage door. He heard the door open. He heard keys hit the counter. He heard the rustle of my backpack, then the fridge or pantry opening like I was grabbing a snack. Then he heard me run upstairs. And in our house, That sound was impossible to mistake. The stairs were old and loud, and I had a very specific way of running up them, kind of quick and heavy, like I was always in a hurry. He heard my bedroom door close. So when he came out of the bathroom, he walked over to the bottom of the stairs and called up to me. My room was right at the top, close enough that we could talk even if my door was shut. He asked, "Maya, do you have practice later?" And he heard my voice answer from upstairs. "No, I don't." Nothing about it sounded strange to him at first. It sounded like me. Same voice, same tone, same casual way I would answer. But while he was still standing there at the bottom of the stairs, listening to me upstairs, the garage door opened behind him, and I walked in. He turned around and just went completely pale. I remember him staring at me like he couldn't understand what he was seeing. He asked, "Were you already here?" I told him no, I had just gotten home. Then he said, very quietly, "I was just talking to you upstairs." We went up together, and my bedroom door was wide open. No one was in there. Nothing was out of place. The second time, it happened the other way around. I was the first one home that day. I went up to my room and sat on my bed, probably scrolling on my phone, when I heard the garage door open downstairs. Then I heard someone come inside. The footsteps sounded like my dad's. Heavy, familiar, slow in the way he's always were after work. I heard him go straight into the downstairs bathroom, which was exactly what he usually did when he got home. So I called down, "Hey, Dad," and from downstairs I heard him answer, "Hey." It was his voice, clear as anything. A minute later, I heard the garage door open and close again, and at first, I didn't think much of it. I assumed maybe he had gone back out to grab something from the van. But then I got up and sat at my desk, which faced the front window. His work van wasn't in the driveway, and that van was too big to fit inside the garage, so there was no chance he had parked in there. I checked the street too. Nothing. That's when my stomach dropped. I texted him and asked, "Are you home?" He replied, "Not yet. I'm almost there." I just sat there, frozen, waiting for him to actually arrive. When he finally pulled into the driveway, I told him everything, and that was when we really connected both stories. At first, the obvious fear was that someone had been in the house. An intruder, a person, something explainable, even if it was terrifying. But that didn't make sense. Whoever came in would have had to open the garage door right after I had closed it, and we had an app that tracked when the garage opened and shut. We also had security cameras around the house because I had always been extremely afraid of someone breaking in while I was home alone. We checked everything. The garage door hadn't opened between the time I got home and the time my dad actually arrived. The cameras showed no one walking near the property. No one came up the driveway. No one approached the house. There was just nothing. For a long time, it scared me more than I can explain. I had spent my whole life worrying about burglars and break-ins, but this didn't feel like that anymore, because whatever my dad heard sounded like me. And whatever I heard sounded like him. It was like the house had repeated us before we were even there. My little boy, Eli, was just shy of 2 when he started saying this word all the time. It sounded like Abigail, but in that soft, toddler way where half the sounds are still tumbling around in their mouth. At first, I didn't think much of it. Kids make up words. They grab little scraps of language and turn them into their own tiny universe. But after a few weeks of hearing it over and over, I finally thought, okay, I need to know what this means. So I asked him, "Can you show me the Abigail?" Of course, he couldn't explain it. He was still at that age where most conversations were built out of pointing, nodding, and the occasional very passionate no. So he pointed across the room, and I started naming things. The lamp? The blanket? Your blocks? No, no, no. Then he pointed somewhere else. Then somewhere else again. And then he started laughing, like this whole thing was hilarious to him. I remember feeling amused at first, then a little unsettled, because it wasn't like he was just pointing randomly. It felt like he knew exactly what he meant, and I was the one being hopelessly slow. So I took his hand and said, "All right, let's go find Abigail." We walked through the whole house. Room by room, I'd say, "Where is Abigail?" And he would point, giggle, and then move on. We never found an object. Nothing clicked. I even called a friend later and asked, "What do you think he's trying to say? Bagel? Baggy? Abigail?" We laughed about it, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. That afternoon, I sat down on the sofa and accidentally fell asleep. And I had the clearest dream. A young woman came into the room and sat beside me. She looked maybe 20 or 21, and she was dressed in clothes that looked very old, almost like something from the late 1800s. Nothing about her felt threatening, but she felt very present. She looked at me and said gently, "My name is Annabelle. I don't mean your family any harm. I visit your son sometimes. I had a little boy about his age when I died, and being near your son makes me happy. He laughs with me. He just can't say my name properly yet." I woke up instantly. Not slowly, not groggy. I sat straight up with my heart hammering. I was not a ghost person. I didn't believe in hauntings. I had never had anything paranormal happen to me before. But in that moment, every rational little filing cabinet in my brain just flew open. I knew, with a certainty I still don't like admitting, that something had reached me in that dream. And even though she hadn't seemed cruel or dangerous, I was not okay with it. Because whatever grief or loneliness she had, whatever ache she was trying to soothe, my child was not hers to borrow. So I called a relative of mine who has always said she's had experiences with spirits. She's the kind of person who says it plainly, without drama, like she's talking about the weather. I told her everything. She said that by walking around the house and repeating the name, I may have made the presence stronger somehow. And because I'm usually closed off to that kind of thing, the only way she could get through to me was while I was asleep. Then she told me what to do. Open the windows, go through every room, say out loud that every spirit in the house had to leave and could not come back. I felt ridiculous at first, standing there in my own home, talking to empty corners. But I did it anyway. I opened every window, walked room to room, and said something like, "Any spirit in this house has to leave now. You are not welcome here. You cannot stay near my family, and you cannot come back." And I remember the air feeling strange. That's the only way I can describe it. It felt like the house was holding its breath, then suddenly exhaling, almost like something was being pulled out of the rooms. At one point, I even added, "Except for my dad, if he ever wants to visit." Because apparently, even in a supernatural eviction, I needed to leave one sentimental loophole. But I meant every word. Good, bad, lonely, harmless, whatever it was, it had to go. That was 6 years ago. My son never said that word again. Not once. I grew up in my parents' house, and honestly, there were so many strange things that happened there that I could probably fill an entire book with them. I never really knew where to tell those stories, but it feels like I may have finally found the right place. So I'll start with the one that scared me the most. I was around 15 at the time, maybe 16. I was asleep in my room when I suddenly woke up for no clear reason. Not half awake, not groggy. I mean completely awake, like someone had snapped their fingers right beside my face. I looked at the clock, and it was somewhere after 3 in the morning. I don't remember the exact minute, but I remember feeling this little chill and thinking, of course it's 3-something. That's not creepy at all. I tried to tell myself there was a normal reason for it. Maybe I needed to use the bathroom. Maybe my body had just woken me up. So I got out of bed, even though I already felt uneasy. That house always felt different at night, especially the hallway outside my room. During the day, it was just a hallway, but after dark, it felt heavy, almost like the air had weight to it. I opened my bedroom door and stepped out, heading toward the bathroom. As soon as I came out, I glanced to my right, into the kitchen. And that's when I saw him. There was a little boy standing there. He looked about 4 years old, maybe a little younger. He was wearing a dark suit, a white dress shirt, and a black tie. What shook me most was that he looked almost exactly like my little cousin Miles when he was that age. Not just any version of him either. He looked like Miles on the day of his mother's funeral. I couldn't move. I was standing there frozen, but my whole body was shaking so hard it felt like my bones were rattling inside me. My knees went weak, and I honestly thought I might drop right there in the hallway. For a few seconds, we just stared at each other. Then he turned away from me and started walking through the kitchen toward my mom's room. Her door was open. I wanted to scream for her. I wanted to make any sound at all so she would wake up and see what I was seeing. But nothing came out. It was like my voice had been taken from me. He kept walking until he reached her room. Across from her bed, she had this old, cushioned chair, and he rested his forearm on the arm of it. Then he just stood there, watching her sleep. Somehow, I finally managed to pull enough air into my chest to whisper, "Mom." It was barely anything, but he heard it. He turned his head and looked back at me. Then he vanished. The second he disappeared, I ran back into my bedroom, shut the door, turned on the TV, and switched on every light I could reach. I didn't even try to sleep again until the sun came up. And for the next few nights, that's pretty much how I slept, with the lights blazing and the TV murmuring in the background like it was guarding the room. The part that still bothers me the most is the thought that maybe I woke up because he had been standing there watching me first. I hate that idea. I hate how possible it feels. And I still don't understand why he looked like Miles on the day of my aunt's funeral. I never saw him again after that, but other people in my family had mentioned seeing a little boy in the house before. I just never thought I would be the one to see him so clearly, standing there like a real person. I've been scared before, but nothing has ever felt like that. And I hope I never feel that kind of fear again. My wife, our 7-year-old daughter, and I were out for a walk one evening in early spring. There's this park not too far from where we live in Ontario, right by the water. It's a big place, kind of wooded, with a river running through it and a bunch of different trails branching off. It was around 5:30, maybe a little after, and the park was almost empty. It was still cold enough that there were patches of old snow tucked under the trees and along the banks, and that damp spring chill was in the air. We were walking along one of the paths that follows the river when everything suddenly got quiet. And I mean really quiet. A few minutes before, we'd been hearing birds, squirrels rustling around, little branches snapping in the brush. Then all at once, it was just the wind and the sound of the river moving beside us. At first, I didn't think much of it. It felt strange, sure, but not dangerous. Not yet. Then my daughter stopped walking. She pointed across the river and smiled, all excited, and said, "Mommy, look! The wolf went swimming. My wife and I both turned to look. On the opposite bank, there was this huge wolf pulling itself out of the water. The river was moving fast, and it had to be freezing. There was still snow on the ground, so I don't know what would make an animal go in there. But this wolf just dragged itself up onto the bank, soaked from head to tail. It shook itself off, then turned and looked straight at us. That's when the feeling changed. Our daughter loves animals, so she thought it was amazing. She started trying to wave at it and say hello. But my wife and I both felt it at the same time. Something about it was wrong. It wasn't just looking at us. It was staring. It had this pale gray coat, almost white in places, and dark eyes. The way it looked at us didn't feel like an animal being curious. It felt focused, too focused, like it understood exactly what it was seeing. My wife whispered something under her breath, and I felt her grab my arm and pull our daughter closer. The wolf didn't move. It just stood there, dripping wet, staring across the river. I told our daughter quietly that we needed to keep walking. I said the wolf might be sick and we should leave it alone. So we started moving again, and the wolf followed us. It stayed on the other side of the river, walking along the bank while we walked on the path. It never looked away, not once. Its head stayed turned toward us the whole time, even while it moved. My daughter still didn't understand why we were nervous. She said, "Maybe he likes us." I told her again that it might be sick and that wild animals need space. I tried to keep my voice calm, but honestly, I wanted us out of there as fast as possible without making her panic. The whole park still felt dead silent. No birds, no squirrels. Nothing but the water and our footsteps. The wolf kept following until the path curved into the trees and we couldn't see the river anymore. After a few minutes, the normal sounds slowly came back. Birds, branches moving, animals in the brush. It was like the park started breathing again. My wife and I didn't say much on the way back to the car. We were both rattled. I tried to convince myself it was just a strange animal encounter. Maybe the wolf was sick. Maybe it had been chasing something. Maybe we just caught it at a weird moment. But the next morning, I went outside for a smoke, like I usually do, and I noticed prints in the soft dirt and melting snow near the side of the house. Large paw prints. Too big to be from any normal dog around here. They came toward the house and stopped right below our living room window. The part I still can't get past is this. There were prints leading up to the window, but none leading away. I called my wife outside, and we both looked around. We checked the yard, the side of the house, the driveway, everywhere. We couldn't find a trail leaving, just the tracks coming in and ending there. We checked inside the house, even though obviously nothing was there. I don't know what we expected to find. I wish we had taken pictures right away, but we were too confused and creeped out. Later that day it rained, and most of the prints washed away. You can still kind of see a few faded marks, but not enough to prove anything. I keep trying to explain it logically. Maybe the wolf at the river was sick, and the tracks were from a neighbor's dog. Maybe I'm connecting two things that have nothing to do with each other. But the prints weren't there the day before, and none of our neighbors let their dogs roam around at night. I don't know what we saw by that river, and I really don't know what came up to our window. I need to tell you about something that happened to me back in 2018, because even after all these years, I still think about it more than I'd like to admit. I've never been someone who jumps straight to ghosts. I still don't, really. Part of me keeps trying to file this away under stress, old pipes, tired eyes, Strange timing. But there's another part of me that knows how it felt living in that place, and that part has never been able to relax about it. My girlfriend at the time, Mara, and I had moved into this small detached unit behind another house. From the outside, it looked ordinary enough, maybe a little tired, but nothing alarming. Inside, though, the layout was odd. When you came through the front door, you stepped into this strange little sunroom, almost like someone had tried to turn a garden patio into part of the house. From there, you went up into the kitchen, then straight ahead into the lounge. Off one side were 2 spare rooms, and on the other side was this poorly built enclosed porch that always felt slapped on as an afterthought. If you turned left from the kitchen, you'd pass the bathroom and go into the main bedroom. That room had a tiny ensuite, and beyond it there was another small room that had clearly been added later. The brick matched the rest of the unit, but the floor didn't. The whole house had dull gray tiles, except this one room had these detailed green and blue patterned tiles. They were beautiful, honestly, but they didn't belong there. Not even a little. The first strange thing happened one morning around 9. Mara and I were still in bed, half awake, and we heard this tapping coming from the wall beside us. That wall backed onto the garage, so I assumed it was plumbing, or maybe the building settling. Mara laughed and tapped back. And then it tapped back. At first we thought it was funny. I tapped twice. It tapped twice. She tapped a little rhythm. It copied her. We took turns doing it for a while, like idiots, just laughing in bed and treating it like some weird little game. Eventually we got bored and stopped. Later that afternoon, though, I started thinking about it. That wall was solid brick. It was part of the extension. There shouldn't have been plumbing in it. There shouldn't have been anything in it that could tap back like that. A few weeks later, I was home alone. It was around 8 at night, already dark, and I was studying in one of the spare bedrooms we turned into an office. Mara was out having dinner with a friend, and I was expecting her home soon. I heard the front door open. Then I heard footsteps come through the little entry room, up into the kitchen, and into the lounge. I called out, "Hey, you're back?" No answer. I figured maybe she was tired, or maybe she was on the phone, so I let it go and kept working. Then the footsteps came into the office, and right beside my ear, close enough that I felt my whole body lock up, a man's voice said my name. Not loudly, not whispering either, just rough, gravelly, angry. I spun around so fast I nearly knocked my chair over. There was nobody there. The room was empty. The hallway was empty. The front door was shut. At the time, I was working shifts, so I told myself I was exhausted. That was the explanation I grabbed onto, because it was the only one that let me keep sitting in that house. About a week after that, Mara and I were watching TV in the lounge, again around 8 at night. Both office doors were open, and from where I was sitting, I could see through one of the rooms and out the window into the backyard. I got up to get a drink, and as I turned, I saw a man's face outside the office window, just looking in. He looked pale, bald, maybe middle-aged. I only saw him for a second, but it was enough. The area wasn't exactly great, so my first thought was that someone was casing the place. I grabbed a torch and ran outside, heart hammering, ready to yell at whoever it was. But the yard was empty. No footsteps, no gate moving, no sound of anyone running off. Just darkness and wet grass. A few nights later, around that same time, Mara and I were lying in bed on our phones when the sliding doors out to the porch suddenly exploded with noise. Not literally, but that's how it felt. They rattled so violently it sounded like someone was trying to wrench them open with both hands. The whole frame shook. It was loud, chaotic, awful. like the house itself was being grabbed by the shoulders. We ran out to the lounge. The doors were locked. Nothing outside had moved. Nothing had fallen over. Nothing was disturbed. That was when Mara looked at me and admitted it had happened before. More than once. Sometimes during the day, sometimes at night, usually when I was at work. And I remember feeling this cold little drop in my stomach, because until then, I'd been trying to convince myself each thing was separate. A noise, a tired brain, a face in the window. But suddenly it felt like these things were connected. Not long after that, our relationship started to fall apart. Not because of the house, at least not directly, but the whole place had this pressure to it. We argued more, slept worse, felt heavier. Eventually we broke up, though we stayed civil, and we decided to break the lease and move out. For a few weeks, nothing much happened. Then moving day came. By that evening, around 8 again, almost everything was gone. I went back alone to grab the last few things and check the place one final time. The moment I opened the door, I smelled something warm and rich. Beef stew with red wine and herbs. It was Mara's favorite thing to cook. She made it all the time when we lived there, but the kitchen was empty. The power had mostly been switched off. No one had cooked in that house for days. The smell was so specific that it stopped me right inside the doorway. And suddenly I had this feeling that I should not be there. I hurried through the rooms, grabbed what was left, and threw everything into the back of my ute. Then I stood outside for a second, looking back to make sure all the lights were off. That's when I glanced at the tall, narrow window beside the front door. There was something standing there. A tall, dark, thin figure. Not a shadow on the wall. Not furniture. Not a coat hanging up. A figure. Clear as day, standing inside the house, looking out. I didn't check again. I didn't go back in. I got into the ute, started it, and drove away. I remember taking this huge breath once I was down the road, like my body had been holding it for the entire time we lived there. I never went back. And honestly, I still don't know what was happening in that place, but something was. I've spent most of my life feeling like something has been attached to me. I know how that sounds. I really do. It sounds dramatic, or impossible, or like something I must have imagined when I was young and then carried with me. But I don't think that's what this is. I don't know what else to call it except a presence. A figure. Something that has been around me for as long as I can remember. The strange part is, it has never really hurt me, not directly. It doesn't come after me the way it seems to come after other people. With me, it's more like it watches. It stays close. I'll catch it in the edge of my vision, just for a second. Tall and dark, gone before I can fully turn my head. Sometimes I don't see it at all, but I feel it there. Like the air in the room has shifted. My mother was the first person who ever talked about it. When I was very little, she used to describe seeing a tall, shadowy man around the house. She said his eyes looked reddish, almost glowing, and that he would appear in corners, in hallways, sometimes reflected in mirrors where there should have been nothing behind her. At first, my parents thought maybe it was the house, but then we moved, and it followed. Everywhere we lived, things would happen. Cabinet doors would be found wide open. Objects would slide or fall from counters when nobody was near them. Small belongings would vanish for days and then turn up somewhere impossible, right in the middle of a room we had already searched. Electronics would suddenly die, especially kitchen appliances. I remember one microwave that stopped working the same week we bought it, even though nothing was wrong with the outlet. My parents said the worst of it happened at night. They would wake up from horrible dreams, or feel like something was standing over them. My father once said he felt hands tugging at the blankets. My mother had scratches she couldn't explain. My brother, years later, described the same tall figure without anyone coaching him. He said it stood too still, too straight, and that looking at it made him feel sick. As I got older, It didn't fade. It spread. If I stayed at a cousin's house or slept over at a friend's place, I would sometimes hear about it later. Someone would pull me aside and ask if anything strange happened around me. They would describe hearing whispers, seeing a dark shape near the doorway, feeling watched from the hallway. A few people mentioned missing items. Others said they had nightmares after I stayed there. That was the part that scared me most. They were all describing the same thing, even when I had never told them about it. Some of my relatives are deeply religious, and even they didn't know what to do with it. They prayed over their homes. They had rooms blessed. One aunt kept holy water near every doorway for weeks. She told me the activity would calm down for a little while, but then it would start again, always when I visited, always after I had been there. When I was a teenager, I lost friendships because of it. People who had been close to me suddenly became distant. A few refused to talk about what happened at all. One friend looked genuinely frightened when I tried to bring it up, and after that, she barely spoke to me. I also noticed something else, though I don't know whether it's connected. People who experienced it seemed to become more hostile toward me afterward. Not right away, but slowly, like something sour had been poured into the relationship. Now I'm an adult, and it's still here. I've tried to convince myself I'm wrong. I've wondered if I'm imagining it. I've asked myself whether I'm making connections that aren't really there. But then someone else describes it again. The height, the shadow, the eyes, the feeling of being watched. And I'm right back where I started. The reason I'm talking about this now is because it has started affecting my partner. We don't live together. They live about half an hour away from me, and I only visit sometimes. But lately, they've been telling me that almost every night, something is happening in their house. They've woken up with scratches and bruises. They hear whispering when nobody is there. Pictures have fallen from the walls. Crosses have slipped off nails. There's banging in the walls, bad dreams, heavy footsteps in empty rooms. Their home has been blessed more than once. I've been prayed over and cleansed by their priest several times too. For a few days, things might seem quieter, but then it comes back. And now I can feel my partner pulling away from me. I don't blame them. I hate that anyone near me has to feel afraid. I hate that people I care about end up dragged into this thing I don't understand. I don't even know what it wants. I don't know why it has stayed with me for so long, or why it leaves me mostly alone while frightening everyone around me. I know this sounds unbelievable. I know it sounds like a story someone would tell in the dark just to scare people. But for me, it has been my whole life. And honestly, I just want it to stop. I've had this strange little moment stuck in my head for years now, and honestly, I still feel a little odd talking about it. Not because I think I imagined it, but because every time I try to explain it, it sounds completely unbelievable. My name's Nolan, and I've always been a pretty dedicated runner. Back then, I'd squeeze in miles whenever I could, even if that meant going out late in the evening or after dark. I lived in a quiet suburb in the Midwest, the kind with ponds tucked behind neighborhoods, patches of woods, long stretches of tall grass, and paved trails that weave through everything. It was actually a beautiful place to run. The path went on for miles, and for part of it, it ran behind a row of houses. So even at night, I never felt completely alone. There were porch lights, kitchen windows, back decks, all these little signs of normal life glowing nearby. One summer night, I was out running after dark. I remember exactly where I was. Houses were on my right, and on my left there was this thick, waist-high grass hiding a small pond behind it. I was only a couple miles into my run, moving at a steady pace, nothing unusual going on. And then, this light came out of the grass. That's the simplest way I can say it, but it doesn't really capture how strange it was. It was a bright white orb, maybe about the size of a softball, and it came rushing out from the tall grass like it had somewhere to be. Then it bounced onto the paved path in front of me. Not flickered, not floated, bounced. It moved like something solid, like it had weight to it. It hit the path, popped up, went into the edge of someone's backyard, then bounced back out onto the trail again. Back and forth, again and again. I just stopped. I know how ridiculous that sounds. A bouncing ball of light. Even saying it now makes me feel like I'm trying to describe a dream. But I was wide awake. I wasn't exhausted. I wasn't dehydrated. I hadn't been drinking. I'd eaten normally that day. I was just out for a regular run. And this thing was so bright. It wasn't like a flashlight beam. There was no person standing there shining it. There was no line of light, no trail, no source I could make sense of. It wasn't a laser. It wasn't a reflection catching my eye. It had this weird density to it, almost like the light itself was a physical object. That's the part I keep coming back to. Light usually spreads out or fades at the edges. This didn't. It held together. It stayed clean and bright, like a little white sun bouncing inches above the path. I thought maybe someone could have been in the tall grass, but that didn't make sense either. That grass was thick, and anyone hiding in it would have been dealing with ticks, mud, and who knows what else. And the light wasn't blocked by the grass at all. It came out of there smoothly, like the grass wasn't even in its way. I wish I could tell you I stayed and studied it. I wish I had pulled out my phone and taken a picture, but I didn't. I was scared. Really scared. Something about it felt wrong in a way I can't explain. My whole body just said, "Nope, go home." So I turned around and ran back the way I came. I've thought about that so many times since then. My eyesight isn't perfect, but I had my glasses on, and I could see the path clearly. The houses behind me were lit. The trail wasn't pitch black. I know what I saw well enough that I can still close my eyes and picture it exactly. That bright white orb, bouncing across the path like it belonged there. And every time I remember it, I still get that prickling feeling on the back of my neck. I don't really know what I'm looking for by telling this. Maybe I just want to know whether anyone else has ever seen something like that. Some strange ball of light that moved like it had weight. Something too bright and too solid to be a bug, dust, a flashlight, or anything normal. Because even after all this time, I still don't know what to make of it. Something strange has been happening out here, and honestly, I still don't know what to make of it. It started a few nights in a row, then stopped for a while, and then, out of nowhere, it came back. And the sound is so clear. I mean, if you've ever heard a bicycle rolling over a dirt road, you know that sound. That soft, gritty crunch of tires over loose gravel and packed earth. That's exactly what it is. I live on a dirt road, way out in a quiet, rural mountain area. It isn't a scary place. Most nights, it's peaceful. You hear owls, bugs, coyotes in the distance, maybe something moving in the trees. Normal mountain sounds. But this only happens when I get home from my evening shift, usually sometime between 11 and midnight. I've taken the dogs out later than that, even around 2 or 3 in the morning, and I never hear it then. Only right after I get home. At first I thought, that's odd. Who's riding a bike out here this late? But then I realized the sound wasn't just passing by once. It kept going, back and forth past my driveway, except somehow It always sounded like it was moving in the same direction. It would start louder on the left side of the road, then fade off toward the right. Then a little while later, there it was again. Left to right, left to right. Never the other way. I tried to be reasonable about it. Maybe someone really was riding a bike and casing houses. Maybe it was an animal moving through the brush, and my brain was turning it into a familiar sound. Maybe it was some weird echo from across the valley, because sound travels strangely out here. Coyotes can sound like they're right beside you when they're actually far away. But I'm telling you, it sounded exactly like a bicycle. Then I heard the breathing. Not normal breathing. Not the steady in and out rhythm of someone riding up a road at night. This was more like an animal. Like a dog sniffing around, then clearing its nose with that little huffing sound. My shepherd Milo does it all the time when he's been nosing around in the weeds too long. That's what it sounded like. A huff, a chuff, every few seconds. And that was enough for me. I got myself inside and told myself, it's probably just an animal. You're tired. Your brain is matching it to sounds you already know. The next time it happened, though, the whole mountain was dead silent. That was what bothered me. Usually there's something. Owls, crickets, coyotes, a branch shifting, anything. But that night, there was nothing except my dogs breathing beside me. I got both of them inside without letting them finish their business. I've heard enough warnings about the woods at night to know that when everything goes quiet, you don't stand there being curious. You leave. But then I heard it again. The bicycle sound. And I don't know what got into me, but I wanted to figure it out. So I stepped back outside. This time, it got louder. I was standing in the garage. The dogs were inside. The only light came from behind me, and I couldn't see the bottom of the driveway because everything past the garage was just black. But I swear, the sound was right there, right at the end of the drive. I backed up, closed the garage door, and the second it shut, the sound stopped. The next time it happened was during the last full moon. It was bright enough outside that I could see across the whole valley. I heard the tires again, that rolling crunch on dirt, and I stood there scanning everything like I was investigating a crime scene. The trees, the road, the ditches, the shadows. If it was a person, they would have had to be hiding behind something. But there was nothing. No bike, no rider, no animal. Nothing moving at all. Just the sound. The most recent time, I had the dogs outside. They were doing their business, and then I heard the breathing again. Only this time, there were footsteps too. Not human footsteps, more like hooves moving through grass. And look, I know it could be an animal. I'm a logical person. Deer, elk, something wandering close to the road. That would make sense. But here's the part I can't get past. Milo didn't react. Not once. This is a 90-pound German shepherd. If there's an animal nearby, or a person, or anything moving in the dark, he notices. His ears go up. He stares. He barks. He smells everything. But while I was standing there panicking, convinced something was down by the driveway, he acted like nothing was happening. I called him over and made him sit between my legs because I was so freaked out. Still, nothing. No ear twitch, no growl, no looking toward the road. My other dog didn't react either. Neither of them heard it. But I heard it clearly. It wasn't some branch snapping far away, or a faint noise from across the valley. It sounded close. Right there. Tires on dirt. Breathing in the dark. Hooves in the grass. So now I keep asking myself, what am I hearing? Is there an animal that can make a sound like a bicycle rolling down a dirt road? And even if the breathing is an animal, What's making the tire sound? Because I'll be honest with you, I am not going outside to find out whether elk have learned how to ride bikes. You know, I've lived in the same 3-story house for years, and most of the time it feels completely normal, familiar, safe. The kind of place where every little creak has a reason. But there's one part of the first floor that has never felt quite right. My room is on that floor, along with my parents' room and one of my siblings' rooms. We also keep a spare refrigerator there, mostly so we don't have to keep running up and down the stairs just to get water or snacks. And near that refrigerator, there's this one specific corner. For years, I've had this strange feeling that someone moves through that spot. Not loudly, not dramatically, just quietly passing by. Like a figure walking from the entrance of the floor, past the left side of the fridge, and then across toward my bedroom door. Sometimes I'd catch what looked like a shadow from the corner of my eye. Just a quick movement, a blur. Gone before I could properly look. I always told myself it was nothing, just my mind filling in the blanks. You know how the brain can be, especially when you're tired or alone. It loves turning silence into little ghost stories. But the weird part is, I never really noticed it when I was looking directly at that area. It was always when my attention was somewhere else. I'd be sitting in my room, working on my laptop with the door open, and suddenly, I'd get this strong feeling that someone had walked past my doorway. Except, nobody would be there. I work from home, so during the day I'm usually the only one on that floor. And still, every now and then, I'd feel it. That same movement, that same direction, that same little chill in the air. Then one night, things got harder to explain. It was late, probably around 2 in the morning, and I was sitting in my room with 2 of my siblings, Naira and Sammy. We were just talking, the way you do when it's too late to be awake but nobody wants to sleep yet. At some point, I got up to get some water. The moment I stepped out near the refrigerator, I felt it again. But this time, it wasn't just a shadow or a passing thought. It felt like someone had walked right beside me, close enough that my whole body reacted before my brain could. That presence was so clear, so sudden, that I just turned around and hurried straight back into my room. Naira looked at my face and immediately knew something was wrong. So I told them. For the first time, I finally said out loud what I had been experiencing for years. The shadow, the feeling, the movement near the fridge, that specific path from the entrance toward my room. And that's when both of them went quiet. Because apparently, they had felt it too. Not once, not recently. For years, in the same exact spot. That's the part I still can't shake. One person can imagine something, sure. 2 people maybe. But 3 people sensing the same thing, in the same corner, over the course of years? I don't know. That starts to feel less like imagination and more like the house is holding on to something. And the reason I'm even talking about it now is because it just happened again. A little while ago, I was sitting outside near the refrigerator. It was sometime after 3 in the morning. I had made myself a cup of warm water and was sitting near my workstation, just trying to relax for a minute. Then I felt something in the room beside me, the room where my parents were sleeping. It felt like someone was standing at the doorway, watching me. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was just my tired brain making shapes out of shadows. I do have a pretty active imagination, and I know that. But still, while I was writing this down, I heard a tiny crackling sound from the little kitchen area nearby. It was probably just the induction stove cooling down after I used it to warm the water. Probably. I keep telling myself that. And honestly, if something really is here, whatever it is, it has never hurt us. It has never done anything aggressive. It just passes by. Watches, maybe. exists quietly in that one part of the house. I just hope it stays that way. I know how this is going to sound. I'm a practical person. I've always been the one who wants evidence, explanations, something I can hold in my hand and point to. I don't believe in ghosts. I never have. But a few weeks ago, just before dawn, I was sitting alone on a bench near the old footbridge with a bottle of pills in my coat pocket. It must have been around 3:30 in the morning. The park was empty, cold, and so quiet it almost felt sealed off from the rest of the world. And then there was Luciano. I didn't hear him arrive. I didn't see him walk over. One moment I was alone, and the next he was sitting at the far end of the bench, looking up at the moon like it was telling him a secret. Something about him felt, not frightening exactly, but strange. He looked like a man, but not quite like someone who belonged to the living world. His face was calm in a way that didn't feel human. He barely moved. I don't remember seeing him blink. I don't even remember seeing his chest rise. I was falling apart beside him, trembling so badly I could hardly keep my hands still. And he just sat there with this deep, patient stillness. Not cold, not uncaring, just present. After a long while he spoke. His voice was low, almost like it came from under the bench, from the dirt, from somewhere older than either of us. He said, "The stream does not curse the rocks it meets. It changes shape and keeps moving." I remember laughing a little, but it came out broken. I told him he didn't understand. I told him my life was finished. I had lost my job. My marriage had collapsed. I didn't recognize myself anymore. I told him I felt like there was nothing left of me worth saving. That was when he turned and looked at me. His eyes were dark, but not empty. They were the opposite of empty. They seemed endless. He said, "You are mourning the person you believed you had to remain, but you are not carved from stone. You are wind, rain, heat, morning frost. A storm can change the sky, but it does not erase it." I don't know why, but I listened. We talked for what felt like a long time, maybe hours, maybe only minutes. Time got strange there. He never promised me that everything would become easy. He never said I'd wake up happy or that the pain would vanish. He only spoke to me as if what I was living through was not a final room with no door, but a passage. A brutal one, yes. A dark one. But still a passage. He spoke about grief like it was weather moving through the body. He spoke about failure like it was a language I hadn't learned how to translate yet. He spoke about time as if he had watched people break and return to themselves again and again, across more years than any one person should have. Then, at some point, I looked down to pull my coat tighter around me. When I looked back, Luciano was gone. There were no footsteps, no sound of anyone walking away, no headlights in the distance, no shadow slipping between the trees. Just the bench, the moon, and the cold air where he had been sitting. I went home after that. I walked straight into the bathroom and flushed the pills. I'm not going to pretend everything is fixed. It isn't. I still have hard mornings. I still feel the weight of what I lost. But I'm here, and I'm beginning to look at the rocks in the stream differently. I keep thinking about him, Luciano. So if you were real, thank you. And if you were something my mind created in order to keep me alive, then I guess some part of me still wanted to live after all. I've always grown up with little strange things happening around our house. Nothing that felt completely terrifying, at least not at first. My sisters and I would hear odd bits of sound sometimes, like muffled voices, footsteps when no one was walking, doors clicking open or shut, lights flickering on by themselves. It was creepy, sure, but it was the kind of creepy you learn to shrug off after a while. But one night was different. That night didn't feel like the usual house noises. It felt personal. All of our bedrooms were along the same upstairs hallway. It was pretty late, and I was still awake in my room, talking to my friend Maya on FaceTime. Everyone else was supposed to be asleep. Then I heard rustling coming from my youngest sister's room. Now, my little sister has had a habit of sleepwalking before. Once, she even tried to get out of the house in the middle of the night. So when I heard movement in her room, I immediately got worried. I told Maya to hold on for a second, got up, and stepped into the hallway to check on her. The moment I walked out there, something felt wrong. It's hard to explain, but the air felt heavier. My skin started prickling, and I got goosebumps all over my arms. I kept walking anyway, because I thought maybe my sister was about to wander out again. I made it to her door, and right as I reached for the doorknob, I heard a voice behind me. Clear as day. It said, "What are you doing?" It sounded feminine, but it wasn't my mom. It wasn't either of my sisters. I didn't recognize it at all. And the way it said it wasn't curious or gentle. It sounded sharp, accusing, like I had been caught doing something I wasn't supposed to be doing. I froze for half a second, and then every part of me just said, "Get away." I backed away from my sister's door and ran straight down the hallway into the living room. When I got there, I was completely panicking. I was still on FaceTime, and Maya could see I was freaking out. I asked her if someone on her end had said anything, because I was trying so hard to make it make sense. She said no. Then she told me she had heard the voice too, and it had definitely come from my side. That made it so much worse. She thought it was one of my sisters at first, but both of my sisters were still in their rooms with their doors closed. My parents were downstairs in their bedroom. No one else was in the house, and no one was standing behind me in that hallway. At that point, I started laughing, but not because anything was funny. It was that nervous, panicked kind of laughing where you sound a little unhinged because your brain doesn't know what else to do. My sisters eventually woke up and came out to see why I was making so much noise. Then my mom texted me from downstairs, telling me to quiet down because I had woken her up. I texted back, "I almost died," which, looking back, was not exactly the most comforting thing to send your mother in the middle of the night. I was joking, sort of, but I was also still terrified. Then I explained what had happened, and that's when things got even stranger. The next morning, my mom told me what happened from her side. She said she woke up because she heard me being loud upstairs, sent me that text telling me to be quiet, and then started drifting back to sleep. But right after that, she felt something near her, like someone's face was close to hers. Then a voice harshly whispered right in her ear, "Help me." She woke up completely and looked around the room, but nobody was there except my dad, who was asleep beside her. And right around that same moment, my text came through saying, "I almost died." Sorry, Mom. When we talked about it properly the next morning, we both described the voice almost the same way. Harsh, feminine, unfamiliar, not like anyone in our family. My mom still tries to brush it off and says maybe she was half asleep and imagined it. And honestly, maybe that would explain her part. But it doesn't explain mine. I was wide awake. I was standing in the hallway, and my friend heard it through the phone. Since that night, I haven't heard that voice in the hallway again. But every now and then, when I walk past my sister's door, I still get goosebumps. And sometimes I get that awful feeling that someone is standing right behind me, just close enough to whisper. I think it may have started with something we didn't understand. I've known my friend Wes since kindergarten. I'm a girl, he's a guy. And even though he moved away a couple of years after we met, we stayed close. Our moms were friends too, so that made it easier. We kept finding ways to talk, call, message, whatever we could. Wes lived near this old asylum, a pretty well-known one actually, but I'm not going to say which one. And when we were younger, we would be on calls and hear things in his house. Sometimes something would fall. Sometimes there'd be strange sounds. One time, we honestly thought somebody had broken in. We were terrified. He checked with his brother and there was nobody there. Nothing was out of place. No explanation. At the time, we were kids, so maybe we were just scaring ourselves. I really wanted to believe that. But then, October 11th happened. I was at my grandma's house with Wes, and we did something incredibly stupid. It was daytime, and we were joking around, trying to scare ourselves. We found this rock outside and decided to put a little bit of our blood on it. We said dumb things like, "Whoever wants us can have us." I know how that sounds now. I wish I could go back and stop us. We laughed it off and went on with the sleepover. But later that night, we were in the basement, running around and trying to be quiet. Wes looked down the hallway and he just froze. I mean, completely froze. Then he started panicking. Not fake scared, not joking. He was genuinely having a panic attack. He kept saying he wanted to go upstairs, so I got him out of there as fast as I could. Once he calmed down, I asked him to draw what he saw. It was horrible. He said it was a man, tall and completely black, with his arms twisted inward. His eyes looked glossy and bloodshot, and somehow he reflected the light, even though he looked like a shadow. His face had this melted frown that made my stomach turn. That image stayed with Wes for a long time. After a while, I convinced him we were safe, and we went back downstairs. But the basement felt wrong. We kept hearing noises, and then this disgusting, rotting smell came out of nowhere. We barely slept. The next day, we went home scared. On Halloween, something similar happened again. We heard what sounded like another break-in. We checked. Nobody was there. For a few weeks, nothing really happened, so we told ourselves it was over. It wasn't. Later, I had a sleepover with a newer friend, Kayla. I had been on an Xbox party earlier and kept seeing shadows outside my window, so I was already shaken up. Kayla and I went to the kitchen to calm down, then shut off the lights and started walking back to my room. I've learned, when weird things happen, to act like nothing is happening. I don't know why, but it feels like reacting makes it worse. But I looked back, and Kayla was staring out the window. Then she shoved me and told me to run. We got into my room, and she told me what she saw. And the thing is, Kayla didn't believe in ghosts. She didn't believe in paranormal stuff at all. But that night changed her. She said there was a man hovering outside the living room window. I live in a trailer, and she said she could see his ankles, which doesn't make sense unless he was standing on a ladder. He looked older, maybe in his 50s. His arms were bent inward, just like Wes had described. His face was partly gray, his eyes were squinting, and there was that same strange reflection from the light. She said he stared right at her. After that, more things kept happening. Noises, shadows, cold spots. That feeling of being watched when you know nobody is there. Then, on March 23rd, Wes and I were hanging out again. We were in one of those moods where you want to be scared, like when you want to watch horror videos even though you know you'll regret it. Instead, We tried Bloody Mary. Nothing huge happened at first, but when we left the bathroom, we heard dishes move in the kitchen. There was no one in there. Eventually, I got a Ouija board, an EMF reader, rods, and a little temperature device. Later, my cousin gave me a spirit box too. Through the board, we met someone who called herself Jody. She said she was in her 20s, and she seemed really protective of me. Maybe too protective. Wes and I had dated before, and I think Jody didn't like that. I had a broken closet door leaning inside my closet. It could not have fallen on its own. But one morning, as Wes was waking up and sitting up, the door suddenly dropped right onto his head, perfectly lined up. I woke up immediately, which is strange because I'm a heavy sleeper. I was still weak and half asleep, but somehow I picked the door up and put it back exactly how it had been. Later, we asked the board if Jody had done it. It said yes. There were other moments too. I had an ex who tried to use the board without me, and it wouldn't work. But when I used it alone, it did. A few days later, he showed me he was not a good person at all, and that made me wonder if maybe Jody knew before I did. Then Kayla started coming around more. At first, it was just little things, shadows, sounds, the feeling that something was nearby. But the more she was around me, the more she started seeing things too. Then came Wes's birthday. Kayla was there, along with a few other friends. Wes also had 2 haunted dolls, which honestly didn't help the atmosphere. We were listening to scary stories when I saw him down the hallway. The Shadow Man. That's what we started calling him. I panicked, but the night kept going. Soon we started hearing someone near the front door. Then the sounds moved slowly toward the back of the house, toward the sunroom, which was unlocked. We checked. No one. That whole night was full of noises, sightings, and everyone getting scared all over again. The most recent stuff happened last weekend. Kayla and I were outside late at night at a school playground. It was dark, but the streetlights were on. You know those bead maze toys they have in doctors' offices, where you slide the beads along wires? There was one at the park. Something lifted the beads and glided them all the way up. I was facing it when it happened. The wind couldn't have done it. Maybe it could have been a kid hiding out after dark, but I didn't see anyone. We sprinted home. While we ran, we saw shadows in backyards and heard footsteps behind us. The next night, we went out again. We picked up another friend, Ella, and rode bikes around. We ended up near the park again, by this big parking lot. I saw him first, but I brushed it off because I didn't want to scare anyone. Then Kayla saw him too. After that, we all started hearing and seeing things everywhere. Under cars, on roofs, in backyards. When we got home, Kayla and Ella wanted to go into the backyard. I followed them, but Ella kept saying, "Skinwalker," because every time she said it, the dogs would all stare at the same tree. That was one of the only times I truly felt unsafe. Not just scared, unsafe. I told them I didn't feel right and wanted to go in. I was also getting sick from the cold. My throat gets tight. I start shaking badly. My skin gets red, and I can't warm up. Kayla said, "I think you're just scared." That upset me because I knew what I felt. The next day, Ella was gone before I woke up. Kayla and I went back outside, and then Wes sent a video of his door slamming shut by itself. That's when I realized this was getting out of hand. Kayla hears things by herself now. She sees things by herself now. It feels like whatever this is, it's getting stronger. Later that day, I got hurt pretty badly and couldn't walk well, so I waited alone at the park while Kayla went to get ice. Ella wanted to come back, so Kayla went to pick her up. By then, it was getting dark, and it started raining. I moved my stuff under a covered spot by a glass door and stood there, watching the dark. Then my PTSD kicked in, and I had to move away from the glass. I put my back against the brick wall instead and stayed on the phone with Kayla while she and Ella were on their way back. I was looking to my right when I heard voices. I knew it wasn't them, but I still asked, "Was that you guys?" It wasn't. I whispered, "Someone's here." I stared at the corner of the wall, waiting for someone to walk around it. Then I heard a whisper right in my right ear. I started panicking. I kept asking Kayla how far away she was, over and over, until they finally got there. It was still raining, still thundering, and the sky looked strange. We stayed under the little covered area for a while before heading back. The whole walk home, we kept hearing things, seeing things, feeling things. Eventually, we went to Kayla's, met up with some other friends, and then Kayla came home with me because I needed help walking. Nothing else happened that night, but I don't think it's over. So this all started late on a Friday night, right around 2 in the morning. My boyfriend Mason and I had just gotten back to my house after being out for a while. For a little context, I live with my grandma and my dad. We've also got a full little zoo in the house. I have a dog, my grandma has a dog, and my dad has 2 cats. So altogether, it's 3 adults and 4 animals under one roof. Our house sits on a corner lot in a small rural neighborhood in Appalachia. It's not completely isolated, but it's definitely country. It's the kind of place where people know each other, and honestly, we've never been great about locking the doors. Most of us come and go through the back door anyway. That night, after we got inside, I went straight to the bathroom. Mason said he was going to take my dog out before we went to bed. I had barely been in the bathroom for maybe half a minute when the door opened and he stuck his head in. His face looked completely different. He just said, "Stay in the bathroom. Do not come out." At first, I didn't understand. I was tired, a little tipsy, and I thought maybe I had heard him wrong. So I cracked the bathroom door and looked out. That's when I saw him standing by the back door, staring through the window. The second he noticed me looking, he came back fast, grabbed me, and moved both of us into my bedroom. Then he said, very quietly, but very seriously, "Someone was in the house." He told me he had been standing in the kitchen, trying to get a toy from my dog so he could take him outside. Then suddenly, he saw a light. He said it looked like a flashlight beam, just for a second. When he looked up, he saw the back of a person walking out through our back door. At first, he thought maybe it was my grandma, but when he stepped toward her room, she was asleep. Then he looked into the living room, and my dad was passed out on the couch. This all happened so quickly. The way Mason described it, it couldn't have been more than 15 or 20 seconds. Once he realized it wasn't anyone who lived there, he ran to the back door, opened it, and said he could hear footsteps going down the wooden stairs of the deck. Then he shut the door and stood there looking outside. That's when I came out of the bathroom. He told me he was going to take the dog outside, grab his gun from the car, and check around the house. But the weird thing was, my dog absolutely did not want to go down those stairs. Mason said he had to basically force him, and my dog is huge. He's about 130 pounds, so that is not easy. Mason didn't see anyone outside. Then he told me to go wake up my grandma and ask if she had invited someone over. She has had, let's just say, questionable taste in men lately, so it wasn't completely impossible. I went into her room, shook her awake, and asked if anyone had been at the house. She said no. I asked again, because Mason thought he had heard someone leaving through the back door. And Mason corrected me right away. He said, "No, I saw someone." My grandma just told us to lock the door and went back to sleep. We were both shaken up, but I could tell Mason was really trying to make sense of it himself. He kept saying, "I know this sounds insane, but I know what I saw." And I believed him because he looked genuinely scared. But the part that didn't make sense was the dogs. If someone had been inside that house, why didn't either dog react? And how could someone have gotten past Mason in the kitchen without him noticing sooner? The back door is only about 8 feet from where he was standing. The only explanation that made any kind of sense was that someone had come in, realized Mason and this massive dog were right there, and tried to leave before they got caught. The next morning, my grandma barely remembered me waking her up. My dad brushed the whole thing off. He said, "Why would someone come in here when there are cars in the driveway and the TV is on?" He also said if someone had really been in the house, the dogs would have lost their minds. Then he joked that Mason needed to stay away from mushrooms if he couldn't handle them. But Mason is not like that. He doesn't even like scary movies. He's not someone who goes looking for paranormal stuff or dramatic stories. So the fact that he was that serious about it really stuck with me. Then Saturday night happened. I got home from work around 3 in the morning. I work at a bar, so coming in that late is normal for me. The second I walked in, my dad shot up from the couch and said, "You scared me. I didn't hear you come in." But you are not going to believe what happened tonight. He told me he had heard someone run across the back porch. Not walk. Run. He went outside because he thought he was finally going to catch whoever had been messing around. He checked around the house but didn't see anybody. Then he came back inside. And this is where I honestly still don't know what to think. He said one of the cats was in the kitchen, floating about 3 feet off the ground. Then the cat dropped. He said he walked over toward the pantry, right where the cat had been, and it felt like someone was standing there. Not that he saw a person, but that there was something solid in front of him. He reached his hand out toward the pantry door, but he said he couldn't touch it. Something was blocking him. Then whatever it was pushed him backward into the counter. He swung at it, and whatever he hit was gone. But now there's a hole in the pantry door from where he punched it. And I'm standing there like, "Dad, be serious. You're telling me the cat was levitating?" But he swore on everything that it happened exactly the way he said. And just like Mason, he kept saying, "I know how crazy this sounds." That's the part that bothers me. Both of them reacted the same way. Neither one of them seemed excited or dramatic about it. They seemed confused, almost embarrassed to even say it out loud. And now I'm sitting here waiting for something to happen to me, because a part of me still doesn't fully believe it. My grandma has owned this house for over 30 years. My dad has lived here since he was a teenager. Nothing like this has ever happened before. So I keep asking myself, why now? I don't know what was in the house that night. I don't know if it was a person, something else, or just one very strange chain of events. But I do know this. The energy in this house has felt different ever since.